Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Ironcloud, and I've been protecting Alaska's wilderness for 19 years. That's long enough to see things that would make most people pack up and head back to the lower 48. But what happened at Wonder Lake in September of 1981 changed everything I thought I knew about this land. I was 43 then, getting gray around the edges, but still strong enough to haul an injured hiker 20 miles through snow. My wife Sarah had been gone 3 years by then. Cancer took her fast in that Anchorage hospital. My kids were grown and living down south, doing city jobs I couldn't even pronounce. Alaska was all I had left, and I knew every trail, every stream, every dangerous spot in Denali National Park like they were rooms in my own house. The old-timers in the villages used to tell stories about the kushtaka, water spirits that could change their shape, steal your soul if you weren't careful around remote lakes. I'd grown up hearing my grandmother whisper about them when the wind howled through our cabin. But after 2 decades of pulling drowning victims from perfectly normal accidents, I figured the stories were just ways to keep kids from wandering too close to dangerous water. I should have listened better. It started with a radio call on September 15th. Dr. Elizabeth Chen and her research team had been studying caribou migration patterns near Wonder Lake for 2 weeks. They were supposed to check in every 12 hours, standard procedure when you're that far out. But they'd gone quiet for 3 days straight. "Marcus, we need you to check on the Chen expedition," came the scratchy voice of my supervisor through the radio. "Weather's been bad up there. Chopper can't get through the passes." I looked out my ranger station window at the gray sky. Early autumn in Alaska meant the weather could turn deadly without warning. Temperature would drop to 10 below at night, and whiteout conditions could last for days. "How many people?" I asked. 4. 2 graduate students, 1 research assistant, and Dr. Chen. "They're smart people, Marcus, but city smart. Not wilderness smart." That was the problem with most researchers who came up here. They knew their books and their computers, but they didn't understand how fast Alaska could kill you. A sudden storm, a wrong turn, ice that looked solid but wasn't. Any of these things could turn a science expedition into a body recovery mission. I packed my gear that afternoon: emergency shelter, first aid kit, enough food for a week, and my PRC-25 radio. The hike to Wonder Lake was 40 miles through rough terrain, but I'd done it dozens of times. I knew the trails even in the dark. What bothered me was the silence on the radio, not just from Chen's team, but from the land itself. Usually, Wonder Lake area buzzed with pilot chatter, hunting guides checking weather, other research teams comparing notes. But for 3 days, nothing. Like that whole section of the park had just stopped talking. I set out at dawn on September 16th. The first 20 miles felt normal, my boots crunching through frost-covered tundra, eagles circling overhead, the distant sound of caribou moving south for winter. But as I got closer to Wonder Lake, things started feeling wrong. The birds went quiet first, no ravens calling, no ptarmigan chattering in the brush. Then the insects stopped buzzing. By the time I could see the lake's gray water in the distance, the only sound was my own breathing and the crunch of my footsteps. I'd been in quiet wilderness before. Sometimes Alaska just holds its breath, but this was different. This felt like the land itself was listening to something I couldn't hear. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since morning, even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. My compass started acting strange too, the needle swinging back and forth instead of pointing steady north. I tapped it a few times, figuring it was the cold, but it kept dancing around like something was pulling it. When I finally reached the ridge overlooking Wonder Lake, I stopped and pulled out my binoculars. The research camp was set up on the north shore, exactly where it was supposed to be. 4 bright orange tents, equipment table, even a small campfire with smoke rising from it. But no people. No movement at all. I watched for 20 minutes, waiting for someone to step out of a tent or return from collecting data. Nothing. The smoke kept rising straight up in the still air, like someone had just fed the fire. But the camp looked empty as a graveyard. That's when I noticed something else. The lake was perfectly still. No ripples, no fish jumping, no ducks landing. just flat gray water that looked more like a mirror than a living lake. I'd found plenty of abandoned camps over the years. People got spooked by bears, ran out of food, had equipment failures. There were always signs, scattered gear, trampled ground, obvious reasons why folks had packed up quick. But the Chen camp looked normal. Too normal. I started down toward the shore, and that's when the real wrongness hit me. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was complete. No wind, no water lapping at rocks, no insects buzzing around my head. It was like someone had wrapped the whole area in invisible cotton. And underneath it all, I could feel something watching me. I approached the research camp like I was walking into a crime scene. 19 years of ranger work teaches you to notice things, disturbed ground, broken branches, anything that doesn't belong. But everything here looked normal. Too normal. The first tent I checked belonged to Dr. Chen. Her sleeping bag was laid out neat, laptop computer sitting open on a folding table, coffee mug still warm to the touch. Not just warm, hot enough to burn my fingers when I picked it up. Fresh coffee, like someone had poured it 5 minutes ago. But the tent was empty. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing broken, just gone. The other tents were the same story. Personal items laid out normal, equipment in perfect order, no signs anyone had left in a hurry. In the graduate student's tent, I found 2 bowls with half-eaten oatmeal, still warm, spoons laying beside them like they'd been set down mid-bite. Outside the equipment tent, I found something that made my skin crawl. 4 PRC-25 radios, just like mine, sitting in a neat row on the folding table. All of them soaking wet, water dripping from the speakers and battery packs. But it hadn't rained in 3 days, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I picked up one of the radios and tried to turn it on. Dead as a stone. Water had gotten into every part of it, not just surface water, but deep saturation, like they'd been underwater for hours. The weird part was, these radios were waterproof. I'd dropped mine in streams plenty of times without damage. Someone or something had to have held them underwater deliberately. I tried my own radio, calling back to headquarters. Base, this is Ironcloud. Found the research camp. Empty but no signs of emergency. Requesting backup and helicopter support. Static, not even the hiss of an open channel. Complete dead air. I checked my battery, adjusted the antenna, tried different frequencies. Nothing. My radio had been working fine just 5 miles back. That's when I found the tracks. They started at the edge of the camp and led straight toward Wonder Lake. Human footprints in the soft mud, 4 different sets, just like you'd expect from a research team. But these tracks were wrong in ways that made my stomach turn. First, they were too deep. Like each person was carrying twice their normal weight. Second, the stride length was all wrong. Too long for normal walking, like they were taking huge steps or being pulled forward. And third, the tracks led right into the lake and didn't come back out. I followed the trail to the water's edge. The footprints went down the muddy bank and disappeared under the surface about 10 feet from shore. No tracks leading out anywhere else, no signs they'd turned around or changed direction. 4 people had walked into Wonder Lake and vanished. The water was crystal clear and only about 4 feet deep where the tracks ended. I could see the bottom perfectly, smooth stones and sand, no bodies, no equipment, nothing. Just the footprint impressions continuing down into deeper water until they faded into the dark. I waded in up to my knees, following the tracks. The water was so cold it made my bones ache, much colder than it should have been for September. My legs went numb after 30 seconds. But I could still see the footprints, like dark shadows pressed into the lake bottom, leading toward the center where the water turned black. That's when I heard the voice. "Help me." It came from under the water, muffled but clear. A woman's voice, scared and desperate. "Please help me. I'm trapped down here." I yanked my legs out of the water and stumbled backward onto the shore. The voice had sounded like Dr. Chen, but that was impossible. The water where I'd been standing was only chest deep. Nobody could survive underwater for 3 days. "Help me, please." The voice came again, and this time I was sure it was Dr. Chen. "I can't get out. Something's holding me down." My heart was hammering as I looked out at the lake. The surface was perfectly still, like glass. No bubbles, no ripples, no sign of anyone underneath. But the voice kept calling. "I can see you up there. Please don't leave us." Us. More than one person down there. I grabbed a long branch from the shore and waded back in, probing the bottom where the voice seemed to be coming from. The branch went down 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet without touching anything solid, but the water still looked only 4 feet deep. "We're right here," came another voice, male this time, young, "right beneath your feet. Why can't you see us?" I pulled the branch up fast and backed away from the water. This was wrong. All wrong. Lakes don't have invisible deep spots, and people don't survive 3 days underwater calling for help. But the voices kept coming. "Marcus," Dr. Chen's voice again, but how did she know my name? "Marcus Ironcloud, we need your help. Something took us. Something that lives in the water." I hadn't told anyone at the research camp my full name. I'd never even met Dr. Chen before this trip. The sun was starting to set, painting the lake orange and red. I needed to make a decision: set up camp and wait for backup, or hike 40 miles back in the dark. Neither option felt safe. Then I remembered what my grandmother used to say about water spirits. They're strongest at dawn and dusk, when the light plays tricks on your eyes, and they always know your name, because they can see into your heart. I was setting up my emergency shelter when I heard the snowmobile engine echoing across the lake. The sound of the approaching snowmobile was the first normal thing I'd heard in hours. As it got closer, I could see it was Helen Fairbanks from the Kantishna station. A tough woman in her 30s who'd been working these mountains longer than most men. If anyone could help me figure out what happened to the research team, it was Helen. She pulled up to my camp just as I finished setting up the shelter. Her face was red from the cold ride, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Helen never missed details. "Got your radio message about the missing researchers," she said, pulling off her helmet. "Took me 6 hours to get here. Road conditions are terrible." I frowned. "I didn't send any radio message. My radio's been dead since I got here." Helen's expression changed. "That's weird. Someone using your call sign requested backup at Wonder Lake, said you'd found something strange and needed help." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. "Helen, I've been trying to radio headquarters all day. Nothing's working." She tried her own radio then, calling back to base. Dead air, just like mine. We looked at each other for a long moment, both understanding that we were now cut off completely, 40 miles from help. "Show me what you found," she said. I walked her through the empty camp, showed her the wet radios, pointed out the tracks leading into the lake. Helen examined everything carefully, taking photos with her camera. She was thorough and professional, but I could see the worry growing in her eyes. "These tracks are impossible," she said finally. 4 people don't just walk into a lake and disappear. "There's something else," I said. "I've been hearing voices from under the water. They sound like the missing researchers." Helen gave me a sharp look. "Voices?" As if summoned by our conversation, Dr. Chen's voice drifted up from the lake again. "Help us, please. We're trapped down here." Helen's face went white. She walked to the water's edge and knelt down, listening. "I can see you both up there," the voice continued. "2 rangers. The man has gray hair and the woman has a blue jacket." Helen was wearing a blue ranger jacket. She stood up fast, backing away from the water. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Nobody's down there. I can see straight to the bottom." More voices joined in then. Young male voices, probably the graduate students. "Please help us. It's so cold down here. We can't get back to the surface." "Something's holding us," came another voice. "It looks like a person, but it changes shape. Sometimes it's an otter. Sometimes it's something else." Helen pulled out her service weapon and pointed it at the water. "This is some kind of trick. Someone's playing sounds through underwater speakers." But even as she said it, I could see she didn't believe it. The voices were too clear, too real, and they knew things they shouldn't know. "Look at your compass," I told her. She checked her compass and swore softly. The needle was spinning in circles, just like mine had been doing all day. "Temperature's dropping fast too," I said. "Has to be 20 below now, but there's no wind." That's when we saw the first shape moving under the water. It was dark and human-sized, swimming back and forth about 20 feet from shore. Too fast for a person, more like a seal or an otter. But every few seconds, it would stop and float upright, and we could see what looked like a human silhouette. "Is that one of the researchers?" Helen asked. As soon as she spoke, the shape turned toward us. It swam closer, and we could see it more clearly. Definitely human-shaped, but moving through the water in ways that didn't look right. No bubbles, No splashing, just smooth gliding motion. It stopped right at the edge where the bottom dropped off into deeper water. We were looking down at what appeared to be Dr. Chen, floating about 8 feet underwater. Her eyes were open, and she was looking right at us. Her mouth moved like she was speaking, and we heard her voice clearly. "Help me get back to the surface. I can't swim up on my own." Helen took a step toward the water, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't. Something's not right about this." The figure in the water gestured for us to come closer. Other shapes appeared beside it. 3 more people floating underwater, all looking up at us with desperate expressions. "They look real," Helen said. "What if they really are trapped somehow?" Part of me wanted to believe it too. But my grandmother's stories kept echoing in my head. Water spirits that could take human form, that could trick you into joining them in their underwater world. "If they're real," I said, "why haven't they drowned after 3 days underwater?" Before Helen could answer, something grabbed her ankle. She screamed and fell forward, her leg disappearing into the lake up to her knee. The water around her leg turned black, like ink spreading through clear liquid. She clawed at the muddy bank, trying to pull herself away from whatever had hold of her. I grabbed her shoulders and pulled hard, but something under the water was pulling harder. Helen was sliding inch by inch toward deeper water, her fingernails digging furrows in the mud. "It's got me," she gasped. Something with hands, cold hands. The shapes under the water were moving closer now, all 4 of them. As they came into the shallow area, I could see they weren't quite human anymore. Their features kept shifting, like reflections on moving water. Sometimes they looked like the missing researchers, sometimes like something else entirely. I pulled out my knife and slashed at the water where Helen's leg disappeared. The blade hit something solid but slippery. Whatever was holding her let go with a sound like a seal barking, and Helen scrambled backward onto dry ground. Her leg was blue with cold and covered in what looked like handprints, 5-fingered marks pressed into her skin like bruises. But the marks were too big for human hands, and there were too many of them, like something with multiple arms had wrapped around her. "We need to get away from the water," I said, helping Helen to her feet. But as we backed toward our camp, the lake started to change. The surface began to ripple, then churn, like something massive was moving underneath. The water level rose higher than it should have been able to. Waves lapping at our boots, even though we were 20 feet from what used to be the shoreline. And from the depths came a sound I'd never heard before. Part whale song, 40, part human scream, part something else entirely. It was the sound of something ancient and hungry calling its prey. The voices started again, but now they weren't just coming from the lake. They were coming from behind us, from the forest, from the empty research tents. The same voices, calling our names, asking for help. "Helen," came Dr. Chen's voice from the direction of the camp. "Marcus, come help us. We're back at the tents now." But when we turned to look, the tents were still empty. The voices were coming from nothing, from the air itself. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with missing researchers anymore. We were dealing with something that had taken them. Something that could use their voices, their appearance, their memories, and now it wanted us too. The voices surrounded us now, calling from every direction. Dr. Chen's voice from the forest, the graduate students from behind the tents, all of them pleading for help, all of them impossible. Helen's leg was getting worse. The bruise marks were spreading up past her knee, turning the skin a deep blue-black color. She was shivering hard, even though I'd wrapped her in my emergency blanket. "We can't stay here," I told her. "Whatever's in that lake, it's getting stronger." She nodded, but when she tried to stand, her injured leg gave out. The cold was spreading through her whole body now, like whatever had grabbed her was still draining her warmth. "Go without me," she whispered. "Get back to headquarters. Tell them what happened." "I'm not leaving you." That's when the lake exploded. Water shot up like a geyser, 30 feet into the air. When it came crashing down, something came with it. Something huge and dark that landed in the shallows with a sound like thunder. At first, it looked like a massive otter, 8 feet long and covered in sleek black fur. But as it pulled itself onto the shore, it started changing. The fur melted away, replaced by pale human skin. The body stretched and twisted, growing arms and legs. Within seconds, a giant human figure stood dripping at the water's edge. But it wasn't quite human. The proportions were wrong, arms too long, fingers that ended in claws, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. And its face kept shifting, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to look like. Sometimes it looked like Dr. Chen, sometimes like one of the graduate students, sometimes like people I'd never seen before. Dozens of different faces flickering across its features like a broken television. "You've seen too much," it said, and its voice was a mixture of every voice we'd heard from the lake. "You know what I am now." My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "The Kushtaka steal souls from those who die in the water. They keep them alive, but trapped, using their life force to grow stronger." "You're Kushtaka," I said. The creature smiled with too many teeth. "Your grandmother was a wise woman, Marcus Ironcloud. She taught you the old words, the old protections. But she's been dead 10 years, and the old ways are forgotten. How did it know about my grandmother?" But even as I thought the question, I realized the answer. It had the voices and memories of everyone it had taken over the years. How many people had died in remote Alaskan lakes? How many souls was it keeping trapped? "Where are the researchers?" Helen asked through chattering teeth. The creature gestured toward the lake. "Safe in my home, preserved. They're not dead, just sleeping, dreaming of their old lives while I use their memories, their knowledge, their voices." The water in the lake started to glow with a pale green light. Deep under the surface, I could see shapes moving. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. People floating in what looked like underwater caves, perfectly preserved but motionless. "I've been collecting souls for 300 years, the creature said. "Trappers, gold miners, hunters, researchers. All the lonely people who venture too far into my territory. They make excellent additions to my collection." It started walking toward us, water still streaming from its body. Each step left a puddle that immediately froze solid. "You will join them," it continued. "Your knowledge, your memories, your life force. Rangers know the wilderness better than most. You'll be very useful." I helped Helen to her feet, but there was nowhere to run. We were 40 miles from help, she could barely walk, and the creature was between us and any escape route. That's when I remembered the rest of my grandmother's teachings. The Kushtaka could be fought, but not with weapons. Only with the old words, the protection chants she'd taught me as a child. The creature lunged forward, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to move. Its claws reached for Helen's throat. I started chanting in Athabaskan, words my grandmother had made me memorize but never explained. Ancient syllables that felt heavy on my tongue, like they carried weight beyond their sound. The creature stopped mid-lunge, its face twisted in pain and rage. "Those words have no power," it hissed. "The old ways are dead," but it had stopped moving toward us. The chant was working. I kept speaking the old words, putting all my strength behind them. The creature began to back away, its form becoming unstable. Sometimes it looked human, sometimes like a giant otter, sometimes like something else entirely. "You cannot banish me," it said. "This is my domain. These waters belong to me." The glow from the lake was getting brighter. More shapes were rising from the depths. Dozens of preserved souls, all floating up toward the surface like bubbles. I realized the chant wasn't just protecting us. It was weakening the creature's hold on its collection. "The souls you've trapped," I called out, still chanting between words. "They want to be free." The creature shrieked, a sound that made ice form on the lake's surface. "They are mine. I preserved them from death." But the floating figures were starting to move on their own. One by one, they swam to the surface and pulled themselves onto the shore. Dr. Chen, her graduate students, and dozens of others from across the decades. They looked human, but their skin was blue-white and their eyes glowed with the same green light as the lake. They moved like sleepwalkers, like people caught between life and death. "Help us," Dr. Chen said, her voice echoing strangely. "Break the binding, let us go." The creature was getting smaller, its form becoming less stable. My grandmother's chant was draining its power. "You don't understand," it said desperately. "Without me, they'll die, really die. I saved them from drowning, from freezing, from all the ways this wilderness kills. I gave them eternal life." "Eternal prison," Helen corrected, her voice stronger now. I continued the chant, and one by one, the preserved souls began to fade, not disappearing, but changing. The green glow left their eyes, replaced by something peaceful. They smiled at us, mouths forming silent words of thanks, and then they dissolved into points of light that drifted away on the wind. The creature made one last desperate lunge at me, but it was too weak now. Its claws passed right through my chest like I was made of mist. With a final shriek, it collapsed into a puddle of lake water and melted into the ground. The lake went dark. The temperature started rising. The terrible silence broke as birds began calling again in the distance. Helen and I sat on the shore, breathing hard, watching the last points of light drift away into the sky. "Did we save them?" she asked. I thought about the peaceful expressions on their faces as they faded. "I think we set them free." We hiked 40 miles back to headquarters in 2 days. Helen's leg got better as we got farther from the lake, the blue marks fading until they were just normal bruises. We told our supervisor what really happened, but he couldn't put that in the official report. Instead, it went down as a flash freezing accident. End quote. Researchers fell through thin ice, bodies not recovered due to dangerous conditions. Wonder Lake was declared off-limits for the rest of the season. I stayed on as a ranger for 3 more years, but everything was different after that. I started carrying a small medicine bag my grandmother had given me. Started paying attention to the old stories the elders told. Not everything in the wilderness could be explained with maps and weather reports. Helen transferred to Yellowstone the next spring. She said she needed somewhere with more people and fewer lakes. I didn't blame her. Word got around, the way it does in small communities. Other rangers started telling me their stories. Things they'd seen around remote lakes that didn't make sense, voices calling from underwater, cold spots that had no explanation. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd encountered something like the Kushtaka. The official maps still show Wonder Lake as a research area, but the locals know better. Hunting guides avoid it, bush pilots won't land there, and the tribal elders nod knowingly when you mention the name. Sometimes I still dream about those souls rising from the depths, the grateful looks on their faces as they finally found peace. I think about all the people who went missing in Alaska's remote lakes over the years. How many were listed as drowning accidents when something else entirely had taken them? I retired in 1984 and moved to a cabin near Fairbanks, close to my son's family, but still in the wilderness I love. I teach wilderness survival classes now, passing on what I learned in 19 years of ranger work. But I also share the old stories, the ones my grandmother taught me. Because the wilderness is beautiful and deadly in ways that go beyond avalanches and hypothermia. There are older dangers out there, things that have been hunting in these mountains and lakes since before the first human ever set foot in Alaska. The tourists laugh when I tell them to stay away from isolated lakes, especially during the autumn freeze. They think I'm just being dramatic, sharing local folklore to add color to their adventure. But sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling and the temperature drops 40 degrees in an hour, I get radio calls from other rangers. They describe voices calling from underwater, impossible tracking scenarios, equipment failures that don't make sense. And I tell them what my grandmother taught me. Give them the old words that might save their lives if they're unlucky enough to meet something that shouldn't exist. Because the Kushtaka at Wonder Lake wasn't the only one. They're out there in dozens of remote lakes across Alaska, waiting for the next lonely person to wander too close to the water's edge. So if you ever find yourself camping beside a pristine mountain lake, and the wilderness goes unnaturally quiet, and you hear voices calling for help from places where no one should be, don't go in the water. Just walk away and keep the old protections close to your heart. Some things in Alaska are older and hungrier than bears, and they're still hunting. My name is Catherine Ravencrest, but everyone calls me Kit. I've been a forest ranger in Alaska for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. I was wrong. It was October 1982, and I was stationed at the Tongass National Forest on Prince of Wales Island. If you've never been to Southeast Alaska, picture the biggest, oldest trees you can imagine, then make them twice as big. The cedars here have been growing for 800 years or more. Some are so wide that 10 people holding hands couldn't wrap around them. My grandmother was Tlingit, and she used to tell me stories about these forests when I was little. Stories about spirits that lived in the ancient trees. About guardians that protected the sacred places. She called them Bauk, old ones that kept watch over the forest. I always thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The morning everything changed started like any other October day in Alaska. Cold rain fell steady from a gray sky. Fog hung so thick between the trees that I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The air smelled like wet moss and cedar bark. I was drinking coffee in my ranger station when the radio crackled to life. "Kit, this is dispatch. We've got a situation on the north end of the island. Logging crew hasn't checked in for 2 days." I set down my mug. "Which crew?" "Independent outfit. They were cutting in the old growth area near Whale Creek. Team of 5 men with heavy equipment." My stomach dropped. Whale Creek ran right through one of the oldest cedar groves on the island. The trees there were sacred to my people. No one was supposed to be cutting in that area. "I'll head out and check on them," I said. "Weather service says fog won't lift until evening. You sure you want to go in there today?" I looked out my window at the wall of gray mist. "These guys might be hurt. I'm going." An hour later, I was flying over the forest in a small seaplane with pilot Jake Morrison. Jake had been flying these waters for 20 years. He knew every inlet and creek on the island. "You ever hear any of the old stories about Whale Creek?" I asked him as we flew through the fog. Jake glanced at me. "You mean the Indian legends? About spirits in the trees?" "Tlingit legends," I corrected. "My grandmother's stories." He shrugged. "I don't know about spirits, but something feels off about that place. Animals avoid it. Even in summer, it's always cold near those big cedars." We landed on a small lake about a mile from the logging site. Jake helped me unload my gear, first aid kit, emergency radio, flares, and my service pistol. "I'll be back before dark," I told him. "If you don't hear from me by 6, call for help. Be careful, Kit. This fog makes everything look different, easy to get lost." I started walking toward Whale Creek, following an old deer trail through the forest. The silence felt wrong. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering in the branches, just the steady drip of water from the leaves and my boots squishing in the wet moss. As I got closer to the logging site, I started smelling something strange. Not just the normal forest smells. This was sharper, metallic, like copper pennies. Then I heard it, a low humming sound, like machinery running. But there was something off about it. The pitch was too steady, too perfect. No engine sounds exactly like that. I pushed through a curtain of hanging moss and stepped into a clearing. What I saw there made me stop cold. 5 chainsaws sat embedded in tree trunks, still running. The blades were buried deep in the bark of ancient cedars, motors humming that perfect, impossible note. But there were no men anywhere. I walked closer to the nearest saw. It was a big steel 051, professional grade, the kind that weighed 40 pounds and could cut through a 3-foot trunk. But this one was stuck in the tree like someone had driven it there with a hammer. The bark had grown around the blade edges. That's when I noticed the blood. It wasn't coming from the men. I still hadn't found any men. It was coming from the trees. Where each chainsaw cut into the bark, dark red sap oozed out, but it didn't look like tree sap. It looked like blood. Real blood. I reached for my radio, but it was dead. No static, no power light, nothing. I checked my flashlight, my emergency beacon, even my digital watch. Everything electronic had stopped working. The fog seemed to press closer around me. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds, and somewhere in the distance, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like someone crying. I stood there listening to that awful crying sound echo through the fog. It was coming from deeper in the forest, near the biggest trees. My training said to investigate. My gut said to run. I followed the sound. The crying led me to a grove of the oldest cedars on the island. These trees were massive, some over 15 feet across, with trunks that disappeared up into the fog. This was a sacred place. My grandmother had brought me here once when I was 12 and told me to always show respect. But someone hadn't shown respect. The ground was torn up by heavy machinery. Deep ruts from bulldozers cut through the moss like wounds. And scattered around the grove, I found the first signs of the missing crew. A hard hat sat crushed against a tree trunk 40 feet off the ground. Work boots hung from branches 30 feet up, still laced tight. A flannel shirt was wrapped around a tree like someone had been spun in circles. But no bodies, no blood, no sign of a struggle. I picked up a crushed thermos near one of the giant cedars. Coffee still steamed from it. Whatever happened here was recent. Maybe minutes ago. That's when I saw the marks on the trees. Claw marks. But not from any animal I knew. These gouges were carved deep into the bark, 15 feet off the ground. Each mark was 2 feet long and carved down to the white wood underneath. They looked fresh. I touched one of the marks. The wood was warm. The crying sound stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard footsteps, heavy boots walking through the moss somewhere in the fog. Slow, steady steps coming closer. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service. Are you hurt?" The footsteps stopped. "I'm here to help," I said louder. "If you're injured, I have medical supplies." A voice answered from the fog. But it wasn't speaking English. It was speaking Tlingit, the old dialect my grandmother used, words I hadn't heard since I was a child. The voice said, "They cut the sacred trees. They made the old ones bleed." My skin went cold. I hadn't told anyone I spoke Tlingit. The logging crew wouldn't know the language, and the voice sounded wrong, too deep, like it was coming from inside a cave. "Who are you?" I called back in English. "They took from the forest. Now the forest takes from them." I could see a shape moving in the fog now, tall, much taller than any man. It moved between the tree trunks like a shadow, never quite clear enough to make out details. "Show yourself," I said. My hand moved to my service pistol. The shape stopped behind a cedar tree just 20 feet away. I could see part of it sticking out from behind the trunk. What I saw didn't make sense. The thing's arm looked like it was made of tree bark, rough, brown bark with deep grooves, like it had grown instead of being born. And it was huge, bigger around than my waist. "You have the old blood," the voice said. "You understand the sacred places. Why do you let them cut?" "I didn't know they were here," I said. "I came to stop them. Too late. The cutting is done. The taking is done. Now comes the giving back." The shape moved again, stepping out from behind the tree. I got a full look at it, and my mind tried to reject what I was seeing. It was 12 feet tall, covered in bark and moss like it had grown up from the forest floor. Its face was human-shaped, but made of wood, with glowing amber eyes like tree sap. Roots and branches grew from its shoulders and back, connecting it to the trees around it. This was the Bauk, the forest guardian from my grandmother's stories. "The men who cut the trees," I managed to say. "Where are they?" The creature raised one massive arm and pointed up into the canopy above us. "They become part of what they destroyed. They feed the sacred grove." I looked up and saw them. The 5 loggers hung, wrapped in branches and roots 30 feet above the ground. They were still alive. I could see them moving weakly, but the forest was slowly pulling them into itself. Bark was growing over their arms and legs. Roots were threading through their clothes and hair. One of them saw me looking and tried to scream, but only a whisper came out, "Help me." That's when I heard the seaplane. Jake was coming back early. The sound of his engine cut through the fog like a knife. The Bauk's head turned toward the sound. Its amber eyes flared brighter. "More who do not understand," it said. The creature started walking toward the lake where Jake would land. Each step it took made the ground shake. Birds exploded from the trees, screaming warnings. I had to choose. Try to save the dying loggers, or try to save Jake. I ran after the Bauk. The thing moved through the forest like it owned every tree and stone. Branches bent out of its way, roots pulled back from its feet. It was part of this place in a way I could never be. But I knew these woods too. I'd walked them for 15 years. I knew shortcuts the creature might not. I cut left through a thick stand of hemlocks, racing to reach the lake first. My boots slipped on wet moss. Branches tore at my uniform. But I could hear Jake's engine getting closer. I burst out of the tree line just as his seaplane touched down on the water. The Bauk was still 50 yards behind me, crashing through the forest like a walking earthquake. "Jake!" I screamed, waving my arms. "Get out of here! Take off now!" But he couldn't hear me over his engine. He was already cutting power, getting ready to taxi to shore. The Bauk exploded out of the forest behind me. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Moss hung from its arms like funeral shrouds. Its bark skin was covered in centuries of rain stains and lichen. When it breathed, I could smell deep earth and old roots. Jake saw it and his face went white. He gunned his engine, trying to take off again. Too late. The Bauk waded into the lake. Water boiled and steamed around its legs. It reached Jake's plane just as the pontoons left the water. One massive hand grabbed the tail of the aircraft and dragged it back down. The Bauk held Jake's plane like a child's toy. The engine screamed as Jake tried to pull away, but the creature's grip was absolute. With its free hand, it reached for the cockpit. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my pistol and fired 6 shots at the creature's back. The bullets hit bark and bounced off harmlessly. But the Bauk turned to look at me, and in that moment of distraction, Jake managed to break free. The seaplane shot forward across the lake, gained speed, and lifted into the air just as the creature's claws raked through the space where it had been. Jake disappeared into the fog without looking back. Good, at least he was safe. The Bauk turned its full attention to me. "You defend those who cut the sacred trees," it said. Its voice was like wind through old growth. "You choose their side over the forest." "I don't choose sides," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I protect people. That's my job." "Your job?" The creature took a step closer. Water dripped from its moss-covered arms. "Your job is to guard the forest. Your people have done this for 1,000 years." "My people? The blood of tree speakers runs in you. I smell it. Your grandmother walked with us in the old times." "My grandmother? How could this thing know about her?" "She taught you the old words," the Bauk continued. "She showed you the sacred places. She told you the stories. But you stopped believing. It was true. After my grandmother died when I was 16, I'd pushed away the old stories. I wanted to be modern, scientific, a professional forest ranger, not some superstitious Indian girl. The trees remember her," the creature said. "She would speak to us in the old tongue. She would ask permission before she took anything from the forest. She understood the balance." The Bauk gestured toward the violated grove behind us. "These men took without asking, cut without permission, made the old ones bleed for their greed. The balance must be restored. By killing people? By giving back what was taken." The creature's eyes flared. "They cut 5 sacred trees. 5 lives feed the forest. The balance is maintained." "And me?" I asked. "What about me?" The Bauk studied me for a long moment. "You are blood of my blood. Tree speaker, guardian born. You have a choice to make." "What choice?" "Join us in protecting the sacred places. Take your grandmother's place as speaker between the forest and the outside world. Or what?" The creature smiled, and its bark face cracked like old wood. "Or feed the trees with the others." Behind me, I heard something that made my blood freeze, the sound of chainsaws starting up again. I turned around and saw them. The 5 saws that had been embedded in the trees were cutting themselves free. They floated through the air like deadly spirits, their chains spinning and roaring. "Choose quickly," the Bauk said. "The forest is hungry." I ran. The chainsaws followed me, floating just above head height, their screaming engines drowning out everything else. I ducked and weaved between the ancient cedars as the spinning blades carved chunks out of bark right where my head had been. This was impossible. Chainsaws don't fly, trees don't bleed, creatures made of bark don't walk and talk. But impossible or not, it was happening. I could hear the Bauk following behind me, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. The chainsaws herded me like mechanical wolves, cutting off escape routes, driving me deeper into the sacred grove. I tripped over a root and went down hard. One of the saws dove at me, its chain aimed at my neck. I rolled aside just as it buried itself in the moss where my head had been. "Stop running," the Bauk's voice boomed through the forest. "Accept your heritage. Take your place among the guardians." Another chainsaw swooped down. This time I wasn't fast enough. The chain caught my jacket sleeve and tore through the fabric like paper. Blood ran down my arm. I scrambled behind a massive cedar trunk, using it as shelter. The chainsaws circled the tree like vultures, waiting for me to emerge. "Your grandmother understood," the Bauk said. It was close now, maybe 20 feet away. "She knew that some things are more important than individual lives. The forest has stood here for 10,000 years. It will stand for 10,000 more, but only if it is protected." "My grandmother wouldn't have killed people," I shouted back. "Your grandmother never saw 5 sacred trees murdered in one day," the creature replied. "She never saw the forest bleed like this. Times change. The protection must change too." I looked around desperately for a way out. That's when I saw him. One of the loggers, a young guy, maybe 25, was hanging from the branches directly above me. The forest had wrapped him in roots and moss, but his face was still clear. He was still conscious. "Help me," he whispered. "Please, I can't feel my legs anymore." I could see bark starting to grow over his arms where the roots held him. In another hour, maybe less, he'd be completely absorbed into the tree. Just another ring of growth in the ancient cedar. "I have to get you down," I said. No. His voice was getting weaker. Too late for me. But you can stop this. There's more crews coming. My boss radioed for backup yesterday. 20 more men with heavy equipment. My blood went cold. If 20 more loggers showed up here, the Bauk wouldn't just kill them. It would start a war between the forest and anyone who came near these sacred trees. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning, early. The chainsaws were getting closer, working their way around the tree trunk. I could hear the Bauk's footsteps coming nearer. I had to make a choice. But first, I had to try something my grandmother had taught me when I was 12 years old. I pressed my hand against the bark of the ancient cedar and spoke in Tlingit, words I hadn't used in 20 years. Old one, I said in the ancient language, sacred tree. I am Catherine Ravencrest, daughter of Maria Ravencrest, granddaughter of Anna Ravencrest, the tree speaker. I ask for your help. The bark under my hand grew warm. These men did wrong, but they didn't know better. No one taught them the old ways. No one told them about the sacred places. Their blood won't bring back what was cut. The chainsaws stopped moving. The forest went silent. But I can teach others. I can speak for the trees, to the outside world. I can make sure this never happens again. The Bauk's footsteps stopped. You offer yourself as guardian? The creature's voice came from right behind me. I turned to face it. I offer myself as translator. Bridge between two worlds, like my grandmother was. The Bauk's amber eyes studied me. And if more come to cut the sacred trees, what then? Then we stop them. But we don't have to kill them to do it. Some will not listen. Then those who won't listen face you. But we give them a chance to learn first. The creature was quiet for a long time. Around us, the forest waited. Finally, the Bauk nodded. Your grandmother's wisdom speaks through you. We accept your offer. But there is a price. Of course there was. What price? The creature pointed one massive finger at my chest. You will carry the mark of the forest. You will feel the pain of every tree cut within these sacred boundaries. You will know when the old ones are threatened, and when they call for protection, you will answer. And if I fail, then the forest will take back what it gave. The Bauk reached out and touched my forehead with one bark-covered finger. Pain shot through my skull like lightning. I saw flashes of the forest's memory, centuries of growth and death, storms and fires, the coming of humans, and the slow retreat of the wild places. I felt every chainsaw cut like a knife in my own flesh. I heard the voices of trees crying out as they fell. When it ended, I was on my knees in the moss, gasping for breath. The mark of the forest burned on my forehead like a brand. I could feel it there, a living connection to every tree, every root, every leaf in the sacred grove. When I looked up at the Bauk, I saw it differently now. Not as a monster, but as part of something much larger and older than myself. It is done, the creature said. You are bound to the forest now. Its pain is your pain. Its death is your death. I stood up slowly, still feeling the echo of centuries in my mind. What about them? I pointed up at the loggers hanging in the branches. They violated sacred ground. The balance demands payment. They were just doing their job. They didn't know. The Bauk's bark face cracked in what might have been a smile. You speak for them now? Your first act as guardian is to plead for those who would destroy us. My first act is to try to find another way. I walked to the base of the tree where the young logger hung dying. His eyes were closed now. Bark covered most of his face, but I could still see the rise and fall of his chest. In the old stories my grandmother told me, I said to the Bauk, the forest guardians weren't just about punishment, they were about teaching. Helping people understand the proper way to live with the trees. The old times are gone. Men no longer listen to wisdom. Some will, if we give them the chance. I placed my hand on the tree bark and felt the connection flow through me. The ancient cedar's consciousness touched mine, vast, slow, patient, in a way human minds could never be. Through that connection, I spoke to the tree in the old language. Ancient One, these men meant no disrespect. They were not taught the proper ways. Their ignorance is our failing, not theirs. Will you release them if they swear to protect rather than harm? The tree's answer came not in words, but in feelings. Sadness at the cutting, anger at the violation, but underneath it all, a willingness to forgive. If the balance could be restored another way, the tree will release them, I told the Bauk. But they have to give something back. The creature's eyes narrowed. What can they give? The sacred wood is already cut. Not their lives, their service. They know heavy machinery, they understand logging. They could help us protect other sacred groves, become guardians instead of destroyers. The Bauk was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the other ancient trees whispered in the wind, sharing their thoughts in the network that connected all growing things. The Forest Council will consider this, the creature said finally. But there is still the matter of balance. 5 sacred trees were killed. Something must be given in return. That's when I understood what I had to do. Take me, I said. What? The balance demands 5 lives for 5 trees. Take mine as payment for all of them. The Bauk stared at me. You would die for these men who came to destroy what you are sworn to protect? I would die to show that there's another way, that forest and human can live together without endless war. The creature stepped closer. I could smell the deep earth scent of its bark skin, feel the power radiating from its ancient form. Your grandmother made a similar offer once, it said quietly, when the first loggers came to these islands 50 years ago. She offered her service instead of their lives. What happened? We accepted. She became our voice in the human world. She guided the government to create protected areas. She taught rangers and tourists the proper respect. For 30 years, the sacred groves were safe. Until she died. Until she died, and the protections grew weak, and men like these came with their cutting machines. The Bauk's voice grew hard again. Your offer is the same as hers. Give your life in service, and the balance is restored. But not by dying. No, by living. Living as bridge between worlds, as your grandmother did. The forest claims you as its own, but allows you to walk in both worlds. The creature reached out with both massive hands and placed them on my shoulders. Power flowed through that touch, the deep, slow strength of ancient trees, the patient wisdom of stone and root and loam. You will feel every violation of the sacred places, it warned. You will carry the forest's pain as your own. You will age slowly, as trees age, but you will live long, as trees live. And when your time ends, you will return to feed the soil that births new growth. I accept. The Bauk's hands glowed with amber light. That light flowed into me, changing me, marking me as something no longer entirely human. When it was done, I could feel the difference immediately. My senses were sharper. I could hear individual raindrops hitting leaves, smell the thoughts of animals miles away, feel the slow pulse of sap in every tree trunk, and I could feel the pain of the dying loggers as if it were my own. Release them, I said. The Bauk gestured to the trees above. Slowly, the roots and branches began to withdraw from the trapped men. One by one, they were lowered gently to the forest floor. They were changed, bark patterns scarred their skin, their hair had turned white, their eyes held the stunned look of men who had seen too much. But they were alive. The young logger who had spoken to me crawled over and grabbed my hand. Thank you, he whispered. I'll never forget this. I swear I'll never cut another sacred tree. None of you will, I said. You're going to help me protect them instead. As the morning fog began to lift, I heard the sound of aircraft in the distance. Jake must have reached town and called for help. Soon this place would be full of search and rescue teams, investigators, maybe even federal agents. I looked at the Bauk. What do we tell them? We tell them there was an accident. The men were injured by their equipment and rescued by a forest ranger. We say nothing of the sacred trees or the old guardians. And the blood? The chainsaws stuck in the trees? The creature smiled. Look around you. I did. The grove looked completely normal. The chainsaws sat neatly arranged on the ground, their blades clean. The trees showed no sign of cuts or bleeding. The claw marks had vanished. Forest magic? I asked. Forest magic, the Bauk confirmed. Then it began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. I returned to the deep wood. But I am always near when the sacred places are threatened. Call, and I will answer. Will I see you again? You will see me in every ancient tree. You will hear my voice in the wind through old growth. You are forest-born now, Catherine Ravencrest. You walk between worlds. The creature faded completely, leaving only the whisper of wind in the branches. That was 40 years ago. I'm still here, still serving as a ranger in the Tongass National Forest. The men from that logging crew kept their word. Every one of them became an advocate for forest protection. 2 became park rangers themselves. 1 started a nonprofit that teaches sustainable logging practices. The youngest, the one who spoke to me from the tree branches, became a forest guide who leads groups through the sacred groves and teaches them proper respect. The official report called it an equipment malfunction. 5 men injured when their chainsaws malfunctioned simultaneously, rescued by Ranger Catherine Ravencrest after a difficult search in heavy fog. No mention of ancient guardians or bleeding trees or forest spirits. Most people accepted that story. But word spread quietly through the native communities. The old knowledge was shared again. Children learned the proper ways to walk in sacred places. The forests became protected not just by law, but by understanding. I never married. Never had children of my own. But I've trained dozens of young rangers over the years, teaching them to listen to the forest's voice, to recognize the signs when the old places are threatened. The mark on my forehead faded over time, but I can still feel it there when I touch the bark of ancient trees. I age slowly. People say, I don't look much older than I did 20 years ago. They think it's good genes or clean living. They don't know about the deal I made with powers older than civilization. Every few years, someone tries to log in the sacred groves. They come with chainsaws and bulldozers and permits from bureaucrats who don't understand what they're authorizing. Their equipment always breaks down. Their men get lost in fog that appears from nowhere. Their chainsaws jam and their trucks won't start. Most take the hint and leave. Those who don't, well, the bout keeps its promises too. I see it sometimes, when I walk alone in the oldest parts of the forest, a shadow between the trees. A glimpse of bark-covered arms in my peripheral vision, the amber gleam of ancient eyes watching from the deep wood. The forest has its guardians. Always has, always will. Last week, a new crew showed up with permits to clear-cut a section of old growth near Otter Creek. Their foreman was young, maybe 25, with the same eager look the original loggers had. He wanted to get in and get the job done fast. I met them at the tree line. This area is protected, I told him. Not according to my permits, he said, waving papers. Federal Forestry Service approved this cut. You got a problem with it? Take it up with your bosses. Some things are more important than permits, I said. He laughed. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of environmental bullshit you're trying to pull, but I got quotas to meet. I placed my hand on the bark of a cedar that was already ancient when Columbus landed in the Americas. Through that connection, I felt the network of roots and consciousness that connected every tree in the forest. They knew the loggers were here. They were afraid. One chance, I told the foreman. Turn around and leave. Find another job. Forget you ever saw this place. Or what? You'll have me arrested? I looked past him to where his crew was unloading their chainsaws. Good men, probably, just trying to make a living. They deserved a warning. Or you'll meet the previous owners, I said. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Fog rolled in from nowhere, thick and cold and unnatural. In the distance, something roared. Not an animal sound, but the voice of living wood, stretching and growing and preparing to defend itself. The foreman's eyes went wide. His crew stopped what they were doing and looked around nervously. What the hell was that? One of them asked. I smiled. That was the forest, saying hello. They left without cutting a single tree. These days, most logging operations know to check with me before they start work anywhere near the old-growth areas. Word gets around in small communities. They've learned that Ranger Ravencrest has an uncanny ability to predict equipment failures and weather problems. They don't know the truth. That I can feel the forest's pain as my own. That ancient spirits watch through my eyes. That powers older than human civilization have marked me as their voice in the modern world. But they respect the sacred places, and that's what matters. Sometimes, late at night in my ranger station, I wonder what will happen when I'm gone. Who will take my place as bridge between worlds? Who will speak for the trees when I can no longer walk between the sacred groves? But then I remember what the Bauk told me that day in the fog. The forest has its own plans, its own way of choosing guardians. When my time ends, another will be chosen. The old knowledge will be passed on. The sacred places will remain protected. Until then, I keep walking the boundary between worlds. Human and forest spirit, modern ranger and ancient guardian, protector of the last places where the old powers still run strong. If you ever find yourself in Southeast Alaska, if you're walking through old-growth forest and you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Show respect, move quietly, take only pictures, and leave only footprints. And if you see a woman with graying hair and eyes that hold too much ancient knowledge, listening to voices in the wind that you can't hear, that's probably me. Just remember, some forests are older and wiser than we are. Some trees have been standing since before your ancestors were born. Some places deserve more than our respect. They deserve our protection. The Bauk is still out there, still watching, still guarding the sacred groves. And as long as I draw breath, I'll be watching with it. That's my promise, that's my burden, that's my gift. Welcome to the Tongass National Forest. Walk carefully. Some paths lead deeper than you might think. Asterisk. The story you've just read is based on the personal account of Catherine Ravencrest, former forest ranger, Tongass National Forest, Alaska. Ranger Ravencrest served for 43 years before her retirement in 1999. She still lives in southeast Alaska and continues to serve as a consultant on old-growth forest protection. When asked about the veracity of her account, she simply says, "The trees remember everything. Ask them yourself." My name is Jonathan Grimm, but everyone calls me Wolf. I've spent 18 years as a ranger in gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska, and I've seen things that would make most people quit their first week. I've been charged by grizzlies 3 times. I've pulled frostbite victims out of snow caves. I've tracked wolves across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness. But nothing prepared me for what happened in March of 1989. I'm 41 years old now, divorced, living alone in a cabin that sits 200 miles from the nearest town. My ex-wife Sarah left 5 years ago. She said the isolation was killing her. Said she couldn't handle the long dark winters and the endless silence. I didn't blame her. This place isn't for everyone. Me? I loved it, still do, though that love got complicated after what I experienced. I specialized in large predator tracking. Wolves, mostly. I'd tagged and studied over 200 of them during my time up here. I knew their patterns, their pack behavior, the way they hunted. I could read their tracks in the snow like other people read books. I spoke a bit of Inupiat, picked up from the native guides who sometimes worked with the Park Service. They taught me about the land, the animals, the old ways. They also told me stories about Amarok, the giant spirit wolf. I never believed them. The Inupiat elders would sit by the fire and talk about this creature that hunted alone, bigger than any normal wolf. A guardian that killed evil people who disrespected the land. I figured it was just a metaphor, you know? A way to teach respect for nature. Maybe based on some unusually large wolves from the past. I was wrong about that. It was late winter when everything started. March in the Arctic is brutal. The temperature was sitting at 25 below zero, and we only got about 4 hours of real daylight. The rest was darkness, or that strange twilight that makes everything look unreal. The aurora borealis had been active for days, filling the sky with green and purple curtains of light. I was at my station when the call came through on the satellite phone. A bush pilot had spotted something weird near the Arajech Peak smoke where there shouldn't be smoke, in a part of the park that was completely off limits to camping. Probably poachers, my supervisor said. Go check it out, Wolf. Take your emergency kit. I loaded up my gear. Radio collar tracking equipment, my spotting scope, emergency supplies for building a snow cave if needed. I strapped on my skis and headed out across the tundra with my rifle slung over my shoulder. The standard protocol for these situations was simple. Document what you find, report back, call for backup if needed. The trip took me 6 hours, skiing across frozen ground under that weird purple twilight. The only sounds were my skis cutting through the snow and my breath fogging in the air. No birds, no animals, nothing. That should have been my first warning. In 18 years out here, I'd never experienced silence like that. The Arctic wilderness is never truly quiet. There's always something ravens calling, the wind moving through the rocks, the distant howl of wolves. But that day, nothing. Like every living thing had fled. When I reached the coordinates the pilot had given me, I found the camp. Or what was left of it. The hunting camp was destroyed. Not just ransacked or abandoned, destroyed. 3 tents were shredded to pieces, their fabric hanging in ribbons from broken poles. Equipment was scattered everywhere, some of it crushed like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. A snowmobile lay on its side, its engine torn open. And there were bodies. 6 of them. I'd seen bear attack victims before. I'd seen people who'd been mauled by wolves. This was different. The poachers, and yeah, that's what they were. I found illegal snares and tagged wolf pelts in their gear, had been killed by something with teeth. Big teeth. The bite marks on the bodies were massive, easily 8 or 9 inches across. One man's entire shoulder was gone, taken off in a single bite. Another had his throat torn out so violently that his head was barely attached. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. These were experienced hunters. I found military-grade rifles, high-powered scopes, professional tracking equipment. These guys knew what they were doing. And they'd all died terrified, their faces frozen in expressions of pure horror. I pulled out my camera and started documenting everything. The way I was trained. Take pictures, measure tracks, collect evidence, stay professional, don't panic. The tracks were the worst part. Wolf tracks. Definitely canine, with 4 toes and claw marks. But they were 8 inches wide. 8 inches. The biggest wolf print I'd ever seen before was maybe 5 inches, from a massive male alpha. These tracks were from something that would have to weigh 3, maybe 400 pounds. No wolf gets that big. It's not biologically possible. I followed the tracks away from the camp, trying to make sense of them. They'd appear for 20 feet, then vanish completely. Not fade away like the animal walked onto hard ground, just stop. Like whatever made them had disappeared into thin air. Then they'd start again 50 yards away, coming from a different direction. That's not how tracks work. That's not how anything works. My satellite phone started acting weird. I'd pull it out to call for backup, and it would just show static. The GPS showed my location, jumping around randomly. 1 minute it said I was at the camp. The next it claimed I was 5 miles east, then back again. I tried the radio. Nothing but white noise and occasional bursts of what sounded like howling, but distorted, wrong. The sun was setting well. The little bit of sun we got was dropping below the horizon. I needed to get back to my station, report this, get a team out here. But something made me stop. A howl, long, deep, echoing across the tundra. But it was wrong. Wolf howls have a certain quality to them, a pattern. This was deeper than any wolf I'd ever heard, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound hit my chest like a physical thing, making my ribs vibrate. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. In 18 years, I'd never felt fear like that. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. Instead, I made camp. Professional protocol said to stay put until morning in situations like this. Moving around in the Arctic dark was a good way to die. I built an emergency shelter, got a fire going, and settled in to wait for dawn with my rifle across my lap. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse, maybe 200 yards away. A silhouette against the aurora, something wolf-shaped, but the size of a horse. It stood on a ridge, and even from that distance, I could see 2 points of light where its eyes should be. Green light, bright and steady, watching me. Then it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against a rock, watching the darkness, listening to those howls echo across the empty land. Sometimes they sounded close, sometimes far away, but always impossible to pin down. When dawn finally came, that weird twilight dawn we get in March, I radioed in what I'd found. My supervisor was skeptical about the track size. 8 inches? Wolf, are you sure? Maybe it was a grizzly? No, sir. Definitely canine. 4 toes, claw marks in the right places, but way too big. Silence on the other end. Then, stay put. We're sending Dr. Goldstone. Maria Goldstone was a wildlife biologist who sometimes worked with the Park Service. She'd published papers on apex predators, had degrees from fancy universities, knew her stuff. If anyone could explain this, it would be her. She arrived 6 hours later in a small plane that landed on a flat stretch of tundra. Maria was in her 50s, tough as nails, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that didn't miss anything. "Show me," she said, barely saying hello. I took her to the camp. She spent an hour examining everything with the kind of focused intensity that made me believe we'd get answers. She measured the tracks, took samples, photographed the bodies from every angle. Finally, she stood up and looked at me. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "These bite marks. The jaw strength required would be enormous. And these tracks, Wolf, I've studied wolves for 30 years. Nothing in the fossil record gets this big, not even dire wolves. So what are we dealing with?" She shook her head. I don't know, but we need to find it. If there's an abnormally large predator out here, we need to tag it, study it. The old Inupiat stories were bouncing around in my head. I almost told her about Amarok, but I didn't want to sound crazy. Instead, I said, maybe we should call for more backup. We're scientists, Wolf. Let's gather more data first. We made camp together, setting up a proper base with 2 tents and a strong fire. Maria had brought better radio equipment, but it malfunctioned just like my satellite phone. Every time we tried to call out, we got nothing but static and those weird distorted howls. Solar flares, Maria suggested. They can interfere with communications. For 3 days straight, she didn't have an answer for that. As darkness fell, we took turns on watch. I took the first shift, sitting by the fire with my rifle and Maria's research notes. She documented everything carefully, but her conclusion was the same as mine. This was impossible. Around midnight, I heard something move in the darkness beyond the firelight. Not footsteps exactly, more like a presence, something large displacing air. The hair on my arms stood up. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it out into the night. 2 green eyes reflected back at me, about 7 feet off the ground. Too high for a wolf, way too high. I brought the rifle up, but the eyes vanished. Then I heard breathing, deep and slow, coming from a different direction. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Maria, I called softly, wake up. She came out of her tent, alert instantly. What is it? It's here. It's circling us. We stood back to back, watching the darkness. The fire seemed to get dimmer, like something was sucking the light out of it. The temperature dropped, and I'm talking about a noticeable drop, maybe 10 degrees in a minute. Then we saw it. Not a glimpse this time. A full view, standing maybe 50 yards away in the aurora's light. A wolf the size of a horse, with fur that seemed to shimmer and shift colors. Its eyes glowed green like radioactive pools. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth as long as my fingers. Oh my God, Maria whispered. That's not possible. That can't be real. But it was real. We both saw it. The creature stared at us for what felt like an hour but was probably only a minute. Then it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness with impossible grace for something so large. Maria started taking notes immediately, her hands shaking. We need documentation. We need photographs. This is the discovery of the century, Wolf. Do you understand what this means? I understood something else. The Inupiat elders told me about this. They call it Amarok. They say it judges people, kills those who harm the land without respect. That's just folklore, Maria said. But her voice was uncertain. Those poachers had dozens of illegal pelts. They'd been killing wolves for profit. You're saying that thing killed them as some kind of punishment? I'm saying we should leave. Right now. But Maria wouldn't go. She was a scientist. She needed data, proof, evidence. So we stayed. That was a mistake. Maria took the second watch shift. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. Something felt wrong, worse than before. The air itself seemed thick and hostile. Then I heard Maria scream. I was out of my tent in seconds, rifle up, but I was too late. The creature had her by the throat, lifted off the ground like she weighed nothing. Its massive jaws were clamped around her neck. I could hear bones breaking. I fired 3 shots. Hit it at least twice. I'm a good shot. But the bullets didn't even slow it down. The creature dropped Maria's body and turned those green eyes on me. She was dead. Killed instantly, just like the poachers. And now that thing was looking at me. I ran. Not my proudest moment, but every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to get away. I grabbed my emergency pack and sprinted into the darkness, leaving the camp, the fire, everything behind. The creature followed. I could hear it behind me, those massive paws hitting the snow with sounds like thunder. It wasn't even running fast, it was toying with me, the way a cat plays with a mouse. I skied as fast as I could across the tundra, my lungs burning from the cold air. The aurora above me lit the landscape in green and purple, making everything look unreal, like I was skiing through a nightmare. The creature howled, and the sound hit me like a physical blow. I fell, tumbling down a small slope, losing my skis. My rifle went flying. I scrambled to my feet and kept running on foot, stumbling through snow that was thigh-deep in places. My legs were screaming. My heart felt like it would explode, but I couldn't stop. Then, suddenly, the creature was in front of me. It hadn't run around me. It just appeared, like it could teleport or move through space in ways that didn't follow normal rules. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its shoulders came up to my chest. Its eyes glowed with that wrong green light. Its breath came out in clouds that smelled like blood and earth and something ancient. I fell backward into the snow, completely helpless. The creature stepped closer, lowering its massive head to look at me. And in that moment, I swear it was examining me, judging me, looking into my soul. I thought about everything I'd done in 18 years. The wolves I'd tagged and tracked, the poachers I'd arrested, the times I'd stopped illegal hunting operations, the way I'd tried to protect this place, even when it cost me my marriage and my connection to normal society. The creature's eyes seemed to bore into my memories. Then I understood. "You're Amarok," I said, my voice shaking. "You're the guardian. You kill people who harm the land." The creature didn't move, but I felt something shift, like it was acknowledging my words. "Those poachers," I continued, "they were killing your pack, killing wolves for money, for sport. They deserved what they got." The creature's lips pulled back, showing those enormous teeth. Was it agreeing, or getting ready to kill me too? I thought about Maria. She'd been a good person, a scientist, trying to understand the world. Why had it killed her? Then I realized she'd wanted to capture it, study it, turn it into data. She'd seen it as a specimen, not as something sacred, not as something that deserved respect. "I'm sorry," I said. "We shouldn't have tried to hunt you. You're not some animal to be tagged and studied. You're something older, something that was here before us." I reached back and pulled my rifle out of the snow where it had fallen. The creature tensed, ready to strike. But I didn't point it at the creature. Instead, I laid it down in the snow between us. "This is all I have," I said. "My father's rifle. It's worth more to me than anything. But if you'll let me live, it's yours. An offering, a sign of respect." For a long moment, nothing happened. The creature stared at me, those green eyes burning. The aurora swirled overhead, and I felt like I was in some space between the normal world and something else, something older and more powerful. Then the creature lowered its head and touched its nose to the rifle. The gun seemed to shimmer and fade, like it was being absorbed into something. Then the creature looked at me one more time and turned away. But before it left, it reached out with one massive paw and dragged its claws across my left shoulder. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to hurt, enough to scar. I gasped in pain and fell back into the snow. When I looked up, the creature was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there at all. The aurora faded. The temperature rose back to normal cold instead of that unnatural deep freeze. I was alone on the tundra with a bleeding shoulder and no idea how I was going to get back to civilization. It took me 3 days to make it back to my station. 3 days of skiing with an injured shoulder, rationing my emergency supplies, fighting frostbite. When I finally stumbled through my cabin door, I collapsed. The rescue team found me 2 days later. My supervisor had sent them when I didn't report in. I told them about the poachers, about Maria's death. I said we'd been attacked by a grizzly, a massive, aggressive bear that came into our camp. They bought it. Bears are rare in winter, but not impossible. And the bite marks, while huge, could theoretically be from a bear. They closed off that entire section of the park for aggressive wildlife activity, put up warning signs, made it off limits. The official report said Dr. Maria Goldstone died from a bear attack. The poachers were killed by the same bear, probably because they'd been illegally baiting predators. Case closed. But I know the truth. The scars on my shoulder healed, but they left marks. 3 parallel lines, like claw marks, that look almost tribal. The Inupiat guide who saw them went quiet, then looked at me with respect mixed with fear. "Amarok marked you," he said. "You were judged and found worthy. You're under its protection now." Protection from what? From other spirits, from the old things that still live in the wild places. But also, you can never leave. This land owns you now. He was right about that. I tried to take a vacation to Anchorage 6 months later. Made it as far as the airport before I felt wrong, sick, like something was pulling me back. I turned around and came home. This is where I belong now. Where I'll always belong. I still work as a ranger, but I'm different now. I speak up for indigenous rights, for protecting the land in the old ways, not just the modern conservation methods. I've become an advocate for traditional hunting practices and spiritual respect for nature. And sometimes, on nights when the aurora is bright, I hear howling. That deep, impossible howl that comes from everywhere and nowhere. I look out across the tundra and see green eyes watching from the darkness. I'm not afraid anymore. The creature judged me once and found me worthy. As long as I keep respecting this land, keep protecting it, I'm safe. But I've heard reports. Other rangers, other people who work in the far northern wilderness. Stories about impossible encounters with creatures that shouldn't exist. Giant wolves, yes, but also other things. Bears the size of trucks, ravens with too many eyes, spirits wearing the shapes of animals. The old things are still out there, the guardians. They're watching us, judging us, waiting to see if we'll learn to respect the land they protect. My advice? If you ever find yourself in real wilderness, in places where humans are visitors and nature is in charge, show respect. Follow the old rules. Take only what you need. Give thanks for what you take. And if you hear howling on the wind, howling that sounds wrong, that makes your bones shake and your heart freeze, turn around, go home, you're being warned. Some guardians are merciful, some give second chances, but not all of them do. And you really don't want to find out which kind you're dealing with. My name is Jonathan Wolf Grimm. I've spent 18 years in the Arctic wilderness, and I've learned this truth. We're not alone out here. We never have been. And the things that were here first, they're not going anywhere. They're still watching, still judging, still protecting their land. Remember that if you ever venture into the wild places. Remember and be respectful. Your life might depend on it. My name is Elena Stormwind, and I spent 13 years working as a park ranger in Alaska's most dangerous place. People think I'm crazy for what I'm about to tell you, but I don't care anymore. After what happened at Katmai in August of 1989, I can't keep quiet. I worked in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, where the ground still steams from a volcano that blew up decades ago. My job was watching the volcanic activity and making sure tourists didn't fall into any hot spots. I had a college degree in studying volcanoes, and I'd even survived when Mount St. Helens exploded in 1980. I knew my stuff. The valley was 75 miles from the nearest town. The only way in or out was by small plane that could land on water. During the summer months, I lived in a tiny cabin next to one of the crater lakes. Most people would go crazy from the loneliness. But I liked it. Just me, my equipment, and the wild Alaska landscape. I was 35 then, and I had a son back home living with his grandparents while I worked the summer season. It was hard being away from him, but the job paid well, and someone had to do it. The volcanic area was too dangerous to leave unwatched. The local Alutiiq people had lots of stories about the lakes. They talked about creatures called Qualupalik that lived deep underwater and stole people away. I always thought those were just old tales meant to keep kids from swimming in dangerous water. The lakes had strong currents and sudden drop-offs. People could drown easy if they weren't careful. But I never believed in monsters. I was a scientist. I believed in facts and data and things I could measure with my instruments. That changed when the university team went missing. It was August 15th when Dr. Martinez called on the radio. He was leading a group of 3 scientists who wanted to collect samples from the bottom of Lake Katmai. They had special diving equipment and underwater cameras. Their goal was to study how volcanic heat affected the lake ecosystem. "We'll be there for 5 days," Dr. Martinez told me. "Just routine sampling work." I gave them permission and helped them set up their base camp by the water. They seemed like good people, experienced divers who knew what they were doing. Dr. Martinez had been diving in volcanic areas for 20 years. Their boat was a sturdy 12-footer with a small motor. They had enough air tanks for multiple dives, plus emergency equipment. Everything looked normal and safe. The weather was typical for August, about 50 degrees with sudden fog banks that could roll in without warning. I warned them about the fog and the places where volcanic gas sometimes leaked up through the water. They thanked me and said they'd be careful. For the first 2 days, everything went fine. I could see their boat from my cabin window as they worked. Sometimes I heard their voices carried on the wind as they talked about their samples. At night, I saw the glow from their camp stove. On the 3rd morning, I woke up to total silence. I looked out my window and saw their boat floating in the middle of the lake. But something was wrong. It was just drifting, with no one in it. The motor was off, and I couldn't see any people on shore at their camp. I grabbed my binoculars and took a closer look. The boat was empty, but all their diving gear was gone. Their food and camping supplies were still at their campsite, but there was no sign of the 3 scientists anywhere. That's when I first felt something was really wrong. Not just wrong like someone got hurt in an accident. Wrong like something terrible had happened that didn't make sense. I put on my park ranger uniform, loaded my emergency pack, and took my own small boat out to investigate. As I got closer to their empty boat, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There were scratch marks on the side of the boat, deep gouges in the fiberglass, like something with very sharp claws had grabbed onto it. But what could make marks like that? Bears don't swim out to boats in the middle of lakes. I tied their boat to mine and towed it back to shore. Then I searched their campsite for any clues about what happened. Their tents were still zipped up tight. Their sleeping bags were laid out like they'd planned to sleep there. But all their underwater equipment was missing. The diving suits, air tanks, cameras, everything. I found something else that made my skin crawl. Next to the water's edge, pressed into the mud, were footprints. But they weren't human footprints. They were webbed, like a duck's foot, but much bigger. As big as a human foot, but with long claw marks at the tip of each toe. I radioed for help immediately. The state police said they'd send someone, but it would take at least 2 days to get a search team out to the valley. Until then, I was on my own. That first night after finding the empty boat, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. The wind through the rocks sounded like voices. The water lapping against the shore sounded like footsteps. Around midnight, I heard something that made me grab my flashlight and look out the window. It was a splashing sound, like someone swimming. But when I shone the light on the water, I didn't see anything except small waves moving toward shore. The next morning, I decided to dive down and look for the missing scientists myself. I was certified for rescue diving, and I had emergency gear in case something happened to tourists. If the team had drowned, their bodies would be somewhere in the lake. I put on my wetsuit and diving equipment. The water was surprisingly warm for Alaska, almost comfortable. Usually the crater lakes stayed cold even in summer, but this felt like a heated swimming pool. I dove down about 20 feet and immediately knew something was very wrong. My depth gauge was going crazy, jumping between different numbers that didn't make sense. According to my sonar equipment, the lake was only 60 feet deep. But when I looked down, I could see the water going much deeper into blackness. That's when I saw the lights. Far below me, maybe 100 feet down, there were glowing patches moving through the water. At first I thought they might be some kind of fish, but they were too big and moved too smoothly. They looked almost like stars, but underwater. I tried to dive deeper to get a closer look, but something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a feeling like I was being watched. Like something down in the dark was looking back up at me. I surfaced fast and climbed back onto shore. My hands were shaking as I took off my diving gear. The water temperature gauge showed 92 degrees. That was impossible. Even with volcanic vents, mountain lakes don't get that hot without killing all the fish. But there were still fish in the lake. I could see them swimming near the surface, acting completely normal. That afternoon, a float plane landed on the water. Dr. Robert Kelp climbed out with a load of professional diving equipment. He was a marine biologist from the University of Alaska who specialized in underwater cave systems. "I heard about the missing team," he said as we shook hands. "I've been studying these volcanic lakes for 10 years. There are things down there that most people don't know about." Dr. Kelp was in his 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes. He moved like someone who'd spent his whole life around water. His diving gear was much more advanced than mine. He had underwater cameras, powerful lights, and air tanks that would let him stay down for hours. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Cave systems. Tunnels that connect the lakes to underground volcanic vents. The water down there can be over 200 degrees in some spots. If those scientists went too deep, they could have been killed instantly by superheated water." That made sense, but it didn't explain the scratch marks on their boat or the strange footprints. We made plans to dive together the next morning. Dr. Kelp would use his equipment to map the underwater caves while I searched for any sign of the missing team. That night, I heard the splashing sounds again. This time, I was ready with my flashlight and binoculars. I crept to the window and looked out at the lake. Something large was moving just under the surface, about 50 yards from shore. It was too big to be a fish and moved wrong to be a person swimming. As I watched, It came up for air. What I saw made me drop my binoculars. It looked like a person treading water, but wrong somehow. The head was too large, and the arms were too long. When it raised one arm above the surface, I could see webbing between the fingers. It stayed there for maybe 10 seconds, then slipped back underwater without making a sound. I stood frozen at the window for an hour, but it didn't come back up. The next morning, I told Dr. Kelp what I'd seen. He listened carefully and didn't laugh at me like I expected. The Alutiiq people have stories about things in these lakes, he said. I always assumed they were just explanations for drowning accidents, but I've seen some strange things over the years. Fish that don't belong in freshwater. Underwater rock formations that look almost man-made. We suited up and entered the water together. Dr. Kelp's plan was to follow the deepest part of the lake down into the cave system. My job was to search the shallow areas for bodies or equipment. The water felt even warmer than the day before. My temperature gauge read 95 degrees. Dr. Kelp's advanced equipment showed the lake was much deeper than any official measurements said, over 300 feet in the center. We swam down together until we reached about 40 feet. Then Dr. Kelp signaled that he was going deeper into the cave system while I searched the upper levels. I watched him disappear into the darkness below, his lights getting smaller and smaller until I couldn't see them anymore. I spent an hour searching the shallow areas but found nothing except normal lake bottom. Rocks, mud, and a few fish. I was about to surface when I heard a strange sound through the water. It sounded like someone screaming. I dove toward the sound as fast as I could. My depth gauge showed 60 feet when I saw Dr. Kelp's lights flashing frantically far below me. But something was wrong with the way they were moving, jerking back and forth like he was struggling. I pushed my diving gear to its limit and went deeper than I'd ever gone before. At 80 feet, I could finally see what was happening. Dr. Kelp wasn't alone. Something large and dark was wrapped around him, pulling him deeper into the cave system. I could see his air bubbles streaming up, but they were mixed with something else, something dark that looked like blood. I tried to swim faster, but suddenly my depth gauge went completely crazy. The numbers spun wildly before the screen went black. All my electronic equipment was failing at once. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. There were 3 creatures surrounding Dr. Kelp. They looked like people, but wrong in every way. They were about 7 feet tall, with skin that looked wet and shiny, even underwater. Their arms and legs were too long, and their hands ended in claws instead of fingers. Between their fingers was webbing like a frog's feet. But the worst part was their faces. They had human-like features, but stretched out and changed. Their eyes were huge and completely black. Their mouths were too wide, full of sharp teeth like a shark's. One of them looked up at me, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure, absolute terror. Not just fear of getting hurt, but fear of something so alien that my brain couldn't understand what I was looking at. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound that traveled through the water like a song. But not a pretty song. A sound that made every nerve in my body want to run. I turned and swam for the surface as fast as I could. My lungs were burning, and my heart felt like it might explode, but I didn't stop until I broke through into the air. I dragged myself onto shore and lay there gasping and shaking. When I could finally breathe normally, I looked back at the water. It was completely calm, like nothing had happened. Dr. Kelp never came up. I waited by the lake until dark, hoping to see his air bubbles or some sign he was still alive. But the water stayed silent and still. That night, I tried to radio for help, but something was interfering with my equipment. I could hear bits and pieces of voices, but they were mixed with strange sounds like whale songs or dolphin clicks. I didn't sleep at all. Every few minutes, I heard splashing outside my cabin. When I looked out, I could see shapes moving in the water. Not just one anymore, but several. They would surface just long enough for me to catch a glimpse, then disappear again. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps outside my cabin, but not normal footsteps. These made a wet, slapping sound, like someone walking with swim fins. They circled my cabin slowly, stopping at each window. I grabbed my rifle and crouched in the middle of the room, trying to stay away from all the windows. The footsteps stopped at my front door. Something scratched at the wood. Long, slow scratches that went from the top of the door to the bottom. Then, silence. I waited until sunrise before I dared to look outside. The scratches were there, deep gouges in the wooden door, just like the marks on the boat. But there was something else. Wet footprints leading from the lake to my cabin and back again. The same webbed prints I'd found at the scientists' campsite, but now there were dozens of them. That morning, I tried again to radio for help. This time, I got through to the ranger station in King Salmon. "We need immediate evacuation," I told them. "Dr. Kelp is missing, probably dead. There's something in the lake that's dangerous." "What kind of something?" the voice on the radio asked. I paused. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy? "Unknown wildlife, aggressive and dangerous to humans. I need backup immediately." They promised to send a helicopter as soon as the weather cleared. But a storm was moving in, and it might be 2 or 3 days before anyone could reach me. I spent that day preparing to defend myself. I moved all my food and water away from the windows. I loaded my rifle and made sure I had plenty of ammunition. I set up mirrors so I could watch the lake without exposing myself. As evening approached, I saw more movement in the water than ever before. Shapes gliding just under the surface, sometimes breaking through to breathe or look around. I counted at least 6 different creatures, maybe more. They seemed to be gathering for something. Just before sunset, I saw Dr. Kelp. He was floating face down, about 30 yards from shore. I grabbed my binoculars to get a better look, and what I saw made me sick to my stomach. He was alive, but changed. There were cuts along the sides of his neck that opened and closed like fish gills. His skin had a gray, wet look, and his fingers seemed longer than before. As I watched, he raised his head and looked directly at my cabin. His eyes were completely black now, just like the creatures. When he opened his mouth, water poured out instead of air. He wasn't Dr. Kelp anymore. He was something else wearing Dr. Kelp's body. That night, they came for me. I heard them coming long before they reached my cabin. The sound of wet feet slapping against rocks, getting closer and closer. But this time there were many of them, maybe a dozen or more. They surrounded my cabin completely. I could hear them moving around outside, testing the windows and doors. Sometimes one of them would scratch at the walls with their claws, making a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Then the scratching stopped, and I heard a voice. It was Dr. Kelp's voice, but wrong somehow, like he was talking underwater. "Elena," the voice called. "Elena, come outside. We want to show you something wonderful." I didn't answer. I crouched in the corner with my rifle ready and tried not to make any noise. "We know you're in there," the voice continued. "We've been watching you for days. We know all about you, about your son back home, about how lonely you get out here." How could they know about my son? I'd never told Dr. Kelp about him. "Come outside, Elena. We have friends who want to meet you. Old friends who've been living here much longer than humans have walked on land." I looked out through a crack in the window and saw them clearly for the first time. There were at least 15 creatures standing around my cabin. Some looked more human than others. A few still had pieces of clothing clinging to their changed bodies. They weren't just monsters. They were people who had been changed into monsters. And Dr. Kelp was standing right in front of my door. "The water is so warm, Elena," his voice continued, "so comfortable. And down below, in the deep caves, there are cities. Beautiful cities with lights that glow like stars. You've seen the lights, haven't you?" I had seen them. During my dive, I'd seen the glowing patches far below in the water. "We can show you wonders that no human has ever imagined. All you have to do is come swimming with us, just for a little while." One of the creatures started pushing against my door. The wood creaked and bent, but held. "Elena, you're being very rude. We just want to be friends." That's when I realized they weren't going to give up. They would keep coming back every night until they got me, and the rescue helicopter might not come for days. I made a decision that probably saved my life. I grabbed my emergency scuba gear and my rifle, then opened the window on the backside of my cabin. If they wanted me in the water, I'd meet them there. But on my terms, I slipped out quietly and made my way to the shore. Most of the creatures were still gathered around the front of my cabin, so I had a few minutes before they noticed I was gone. I put on my diving equipment as fast as I could and waded into the water. My plan was to swim underwater to the opposite shore, then hike out on foot. It would take days to reach help, but it was better than staying trapped in my cabin. But as soon as I dove under the surface, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The water was full of them. Creatures swam toward me from every direction, moving faster than any human could swim. Their huge black eyes reflected my diving light as they closed in around me. I tried to swim back to shore, but one of them grabbed my ankle with its clawed hand. The grip was incredibly strong, and the claws cut through my wetsuit like it was paper. It pulled me down toward the deep part of the lake, and suddenly I was surrounded by more creatures than I could count. They formed a circle around me as we descended, their black eyes never leaving me. I tried to use my rifle, but it was impossible to aim underwater. The shots went wild, and the creatures didn't seem afraid of the noise. Down and down we went. My depth gauge showed 100 feet, then 200, then the numbers stopped making sense again. The pressure should have been crushing me, but somehow I could still breathe normally through my diving gear. Then I saw something that made me understand the truth about the lake. We weren't in a natural cave system, we were in something built. The walls around us were too smooth and regular to be natural rock. They were covered with symbols that glowed with the same soft light I'd seen from the surface. And there were lights everywhere. Not electric lights, but something organic that pulsed like a heartbeat. The whole underwater structure was alive somehow. The creatures brought me to a large chamber filled with air. Somehow, impossibly, there was a pocket of breathable air hundreds of feet underwater. They pushed me up through the water until I broke the surface inside this hidden room. I pulled off my diving mask and looked around. The chamber was huge, with walls that curved up into darkness. The same glowing symbols covered everything, providing enough light to see by. And then I saw the others. Along the walls of the chamber were dozens of glass containers filled with water. Inside each container was a person. Some looked like they'd been there for days, others for much longer. They all had the same cuts along their necks that I'd seen on Dr. Kelp, and their eyes were starting to turn black. They were still alive, but changing, being turned into something else. "Welcome to our laboratory," said a voice behind me. I turned around and saw the largest creature I'd encountered yet. It stood almost 8 feet tall and moved with the grace of something that had lived in water its entire life. Its skin was darker than the others, almost black, with patterns that shifted and moved like living tattoos. "We've been studying your species for a very long time," it said in perfect English, "trying to understand how you work, how you think, how you can be improved." "You're experimenting on people," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're helping them evolve. Your bodies are so limited, Elena. You can only live on land, only breathe air. But we can fix that. We can make you better." It gestured toward the containers with one long, clawed hand. "These volunteers are learning to breathe water, learning to see in the deep darkness, learning to swim faster than any fish. In a few more days, they'll be ready to join us permanently." "They're not volunteers," I said. "You kidnapped them. They came to our territory, they took our water and studied our home. We simply invited them to stay and learn about us the way we've learned about them." The creature moved closer, and I could see intelligence in its black eyes. This wasn't just some mindless monster. It was something old and smart and completely alien. "We've been watching you for weeks, Elena. You're perfect for our research. Strong, intelligent, experienced in water. You'll make an excellent addition to our community." That's when I noticed my diving gear was still working. My emergency air tank was nearly full, and I still had my diving knife. The creature was standing next to one of the walls, where the glowing symbols were brightest. If those symbols were some kind of power source, maybe I could damage them. I pretended to stumble backward toward my diving gear, then suddenly grabbed my emergency tank and smashed it against the glowing wall with all my strength. The symbols flickered and went dark. The tank ruptured with explosive force, and the sudden change in pressure shook the entire chamber. Water started rushing in through cracks in the walls. The air pocket was collapsing. The creature roared in anger and reached for me with its claws, but I was already moving. I dove back into the rising water and swam as hard as I could toward what I hoped was the way out. Behind me, I could hear more creatures entering the chamber. The water was full of their angry sounds as they realized their laboratory was flooding. I swam through the tunnels by pure instinct, following any current that seemed to lead upward. My lungs burned, and my diving gear was damaged, but I kept swimming. Finally, I saw light above me. Real light, not the alien glow from the symbols. I broke through the surface of the lake just as the sun was rising. My cabin was still visible on the far shore, and I could see the creatures from last night retreating into the deep water. I swam to shore and collapsed on the rocky beach, gasping for air and shaking with exhaustion. But I was alive, and I knew the truth. The rescue helicopter arrived 6 hours later. By then, I had gathered all my equipment and was ready to leave immediately. I told the pilot we needed to mark the lake as dangerous and get out as fast as possible. When the investigators came to write their report, I told them everything about the missing research team, about Dr. Kelp's disappearance, about what I'd seen in the underwater laboratory. They didn't believe me, of course. The official report blamed the deaths on volcanic gas poisoning. They said the scientists had been overcome by toxic fumes while diving and drowned. Dr. Kelp was listed as missing, presumed dead. The lake was declared off-limits to all recreational activities. No more research teams, no more tourists. They put up warning signs about dangerous gas emissions and unstable volcanic activity. I was quietly transferred to a desk job in Anchorage. My superiors said it was for my own good after the trauma of losing so many people under my watch. They recommended therapy and suggested I take some time to recover. I never went back to the field. I couldn't handle being near water anymore. Even taking a shower became difficult. At night, I would dream about black eyes and webbed claws reaching for me through dark water. My son noticed the change immediately when I came home early that fall. I couldn't explain why I was afraid of lakes and rivers, why I jumped at every splash or ripple. How do you tell a 10-year-old that there are monsters living in the water that want to turn people into something inhuman? Over the years, I heard rumors about other incidents. Fishing boats found empty and drifting on remote Alaskan lakes. Hikers who disappeared near volcanic areas and were never found. Research teams that reported equipment failures and strange underwater phenomena before their communications cut out. I started keeping a private file of these reports. The pattern was always the same. Remote volcanic lakes, missing people, equipment that malfunctioned in ways that made no sense. They're still down there, in Lake Katmai and probably dozens of other places across Alaska. Ancient things that were here long before humans ever set foot in this land. Things that see us as subjects for their experiments, raw material for their evolution projects. The Alutiiq people were right all along. The Kalupalik are real, and they're still taking people. I'm sharing this story now because I'm old, and I don't care anymore if people think I'm crazy. I want people to know the truth before I die. I want them to understand why those lakes are marked as dangerous, why the warning signs are there. Stay away from isolated mountain lakes, especially the ones near volcanic activity. If you see lights moving under the water or notice the temperature is warmer than it should be, get out immediately. If you hear sounds like whale songs coming from freshwater, don't investigate. And if you ever see someone swimming in those dark waters who looks wrong somehow, don't try to help them, just run. Because some depths hide things older than memory, and they're always hungry for new subjects to study. The Kalupalik are still down there, waiting in their underwater cities. Still learning about us. Still changing the people they catch into something that can live in both worlds. And someday, they might decide they've learned enough to come looking for the rest of us. My name is Samuel Brookstone, but everyone calls me Ice. I got that name after losing 3 fingers to frostbite during my second winter as a park ranger in Alaska. That was 20 years ago, and I've been working the Chugach National Forest ever since. 22 years I've battled Alaska winters. 22 years of pulling lost hikers out of snowdrifts, setting off controlled avalanches, and keeping people alive when the temperature drops low enough to freeze your breath solid. I've seen things that would make most folks pack up and move to Florida. But I never believed the old stories about the ice wendigo. The native tribes around here, they got legends going back hundreds of years. Stories about something that hunts in the worst storms. Something that feeds on people when the cold gets bad enough to kill. The Russian Orthodox settlers. They brought their own tales when they came north. All nonsense, I figured. Just ways to explain why trappers and miners went missing during the brutal winters. I live alone in a cabin 30 miles from the nearest town. That's Gakona, population maybe 200 on a good day. My place sits right at the edge of the Copper River Valley, where the glaciers come down from the mountains like frozen rivers. Most people think I'm crazy for staying out here, but I like the quiet. After what happened in February of 1978, though, I understand why they worry. That winter was the worst on record. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache and turns your spit to ice before it hits the ground. We're talking 45 below zero, with winds that could knock a grown man flat. For 3 weeks straight, I couldn't get my radio to work through the storms. No contact with the outside world. Just me, my wood stove, and enough canned food to last until spring. I should have known something was wrong when the animals started acting strange. Ravens are tough birds. They'll sit out the worst weather Alaska can throw at them. But in late February, I noticed they were gone. All of them. The squirrels, too, and the winter hares. Even the mice in my walls went quiet. Everything that could move had moved somewhere else. The wolves were the strangest part. I found tracks around my cabin, not normal wolf tracks, but close. These were bigger, deeper, like whatever made them was carrying extra weight. And they came right up to my windows, which wolves never do. I told myself it was just hunger making them bold. Game gets scarce when the cold bites this deep. Then came the call on my radio. February 23rd, right around noon. Static filled my little cabin, then cleared enough for me to hear dispatch in Anchorage. Ice, you copy? We need you to check on the Morrison family. Haven't heard from them in 5 days. The Morrisons lived 15 miles deeper into the valley. Good people. Tom was a trapper. His wife Sarah taught their 3 kids at home. They had a solid cabin with a backup generator and enough supplies to last months. If anyone could handle a bad storm, it was them. Copy that, I radioed back. Weather's been hell out here. Probably just can't get a signal through. Maybe, but Tom was supposed to check in every 3 days. Radio silence isn't like him. I loaded up my Tucker Snowcat with medical supplies, extra fuel, and my avalanche gear. The Tucker's a beast, half tank, half tractor, built to punch through snowdrifts taller than a man. If anything could get me to the Morrison place, it was that machine. The storm had calmed to just light snow and a steady wind, cold enough to kill you if your engine died, but manageable. I figured I'd find them snowed in with a busted radio, maybe low on heating oil. Simple rescue mission. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but never as wrong as I was that day. The drive took 3 hours through snow so deep it buried the trail markers. I had to stop twice to dig the Tucker out of drifts. By the time I could see smoke rising from the Morrison cabin, the sun was already setting behind the mountains. In February that far north, you don't get much daylight to work with. From a distance, everything looked normal. Smoke from the chimney, lights in the windows, the cabin sitting solid and square like always. But as I got closer, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Then I realized what was bothering me. The cold was wrong. Even inside my heated Tucker, with the engine running and the heater on full blast, I could see my breath. That's not supposed to happen. And the snow around the cabin looked different somehow. Cleaner, like it was reflecting more light than it should. I parked 20 yards from the front door and grabbed my gear. The wind had died completely, which should have been a relief. Instead, the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. That's when I noticed there were no tracks in the snow leading to or from the cabin. None at all. I knocked on the Morrisons' front door and waited. No answer. Knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. The windows glowed yellow with lamplight, and I could smell wood smoke from the chimney, but no one came to the door. Tom, Sarah, it's Ice Brookstone from Park Service. Silence. I tried the door handle. Locked, but I had keys for most of the cabins in my area. Emergency access, in case something like this happened. The lock turned easy enough, and the door swung open. The smell hit me first. Something sweet and wrong, like meat, left too long in a warm place. But the cabin wasn't warm. It was cold as the inside of an icebox. Colder than outside, which made no sense at all. Hello? Anyone home? I stepped inside and felt the temperature drop even more. My breath came out in thick white clouds. Ice crystals were forming on the walls, even though I could hear the wood stove crackling in the next room. I found them in the kitchen. Tom Morrison sat at his table like he was about to eat dinner. His wife Sarah was across from him. Their 3 kids, little Amy, and the twins Jake and Lucy, were in their chairs too, all of them stiff and white as marble. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that pieces of them were missing. Tom's left arm was gone from the elbow down. Sarah was missing everything below her ribcage. The kids. I try not to think about the kids. Whatever had done this hadn't just killed them. It had fed on them, carefully, like it was saving the rest for later. The strange thing was how they looked. No terror on their faces, no signs of struggle. They sat there, peaceful as you please, like they'd just fallen asleep in the cold, except for their eyes. Their eyes were wide open and staring at something behind me. I spun around, hand going to the pistol on my belt. Nothing there but the empty doorway. But the feeling of being watched was so strong I could taste it. That's when I noticed the arrangements. The missing pieces hadn't been torn away random-like. They'd been cut clean and arranged on the table in neat little rows, like someone had been having a feast and wanted everything just so. I backed toward the door, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Carbon monoxide poisoning, maybe? That could explain why they seemed so peaceful, but it wouldn't explain the missing pieces, or the cold, or the way the whole scene looked planned out. My radio crackled to life. Static, then a voice I didn't recognize. Low and rough, like gravel in a blender. They were hungry, so hungry. Who is this? Identify yourself. More static, then winter makes everything hungry. The radio went dead. I tried calling dispatch, but got nothing but white noise. The radio was working fine. I could hear my own voice coming back through the static, but nobody was answering from the outside world. I needed to examine the bodies more carefully, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that cabin. The cold was getting worse by the minute. Frost was forming on my mustache and eyebrows. My fingers were starting to go numb even inside my winter gloves. That's when I saw the tracks. They started at the kitchen table and led to the back door. Not human tracks. Too big, too deep, and the feet were all wrong. The prints looked like a man's, if a man had feet 18 inches long, with claws instead of toes. I followed them to the back door, which hung open on its hinges. The tracks continued out into the snow, heading toward the tree line. But after maybe 20 yards, they just stopped. Like whatever made them had sprouted wings and flown away. The wind picked up again while I stood there staring at those impossible tracks. But this wasn't natural wind. It moved in circles, forming little whirlwinds in the snow, and it was getting stronger fast. I ran back to my Tucker and fired her up. The engine turned over, but rough. The cold was getting to her too. I had maybe an hour of driving time before the whole thing seized up solid. As I backed away from the Morrison cabin, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the tree line. Tall and thin, like a person walking among the pines. But it was moving too fast, covering ground no human could cover, and it seemed to be keeping pace with my Tucker, even though I was doing 30 miles an hour through the snow. I floored it. The Tucker lurched forward, tracks spinning on the ice. In my mirrors, I could see the thing in the trees falling behind. But the storm was picking up again, and the wind was starting to rock my vehicle like a toy. By the time I got back to my cabin, the blizzard was howling worse than before. I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. But as I pulled up to my front door, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Fresh tracks in the snow around my cabin, the same impossible tracks I'd seen at the Morrison place. They circled my home 3 times, then led off toward the glacier valley to the north. Whatever had killed the Morrison family knew where I lived, and it had been here while I was gone. I grabbed my rifle from the gun rack and checked every room in my cabin. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed. But the cold was there too, seeping through the walls like a living thing. My wood stove was burning hot, but the temperature kept dropping. Outside, the wind was making sounds I'd never heard before. Not the regular howl of a winter storm, but something that almost sounded like words, like voices calling from a long way off. I tried the radio again. This time I got through to Anchorage. Dispatch, this is Ice Brookstone. I need a medical examiner and a state trooper at the Morrison cabin. We've got 5 bodies and unusual circumstances. Copy that, Ice. What kind of circumstances? I looked out my window at the swirling snow and tried to think of a way to explain what I'd seen that wouldn't get me committed to an asylum. Looks like an animal attack, maybe wolves. But send someone who knows what they're doing. This isn't normal. Will do. Dr. Grimwald is flying up from Anchorage tomorrow morning, weather permitting. Dr. Patricia Grimwald. I knew her by reputation, best medical examiner in the state, and tough enough to handle anything Alaska could throw at her. If anyone could make sense of what happened to the Morrison family, it was her. I settled in for a long night, rifle across my knees and my wood stove burning full blast. But no matter how much wood I fed that fire, the cold kept creeping in. And somewhere in the storm outside, I could swear I heard something big moving around my cabin, circling, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something scraping against the outside walls, soft and careful, like fingernails on wood. But when I looked out the windows with my flashlight, I couldn't see anything but swirling snow. Around 3 in the morning, the sound stopped. The wind died down to almost nothing, and an eerie quiet settled over the valley. That's when I heard the singing. It was coming from somewhere out in the trees, faint but clear. A woman's voice, high and sweet, singing something in a language I didn't recognize. Russian, maybe, or one of the native dialects. But there shouldn't have been anyone else for miles around. I cracked open my front door and listened. The singing was getting closer, drifting through the forest toward my cabin, beautiful but wrong, like hearing church music in a graveyard at midnight. Then it stopped, sudden as a gunshot. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. Dr. Grimwald arrived the next morning in a state police helicopter. The pilot sat down in the clearing behind my cabin, and out stepped a small woman with gray hair and the no-nonsense look of someone who'd seen everything at least twice. "You must be Ice," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. "Patricia Grimwald, I hear you've got something interesting to show me." "Interesting's one way to put it, Doc. You might want to prepare yourself. This isn't like anything you've seen before." She laughed. "Son, I've been cutting up dead bodies for 30 years. There's not much left that can surprise me." We loaded her gear into my Tucker and headed for the Morrison cabin. The storm had cleared overnight, leaving the valley sparkling white under a weak sun. Beautiful country, if you could ignore what was hiding in it. "Tell me what you found," Dr. Grimwald said as we drove. I described the scene as best I could. The way the family was arranged at the table, the missing pieces, the impossible cold inside a heated cabin. She listened without interrupting, making notes in a little black book. "And you're sure the door was locked when you arrived?" "Positive. Had to use my master key to get in." "Curious. What about signs of forced entry? Broken windows, damaged locks?" "Nothing. Place was sealed up tight as a drum." She nodded and wrote something else down. "I'll want to examine the bodies before we move them." "Can your vehicle get close to the cabin?" "Close enough. But Doc, there's something else you should know. The temperature in that cabin isn't natural. It's cold enough to freeze your breath solid, even with a fire going." Could be a problem with the heating system." "We'll take a look." We reached the Morrison cabin around noon. Dr. Grimwald took one look at the building and frowned. Ice crystals covered every window like flowers, and the snow around the foundation was piled higher than it should have been. "That's odd," she muttered. "The snow pattern suggests wind, but there's no wind today." Inside the cabin, she went straight to work, methodical and professional, taking photographs and measurements while I held the lights. The temperature was even colder than the day before. Our breath hung in the air like fog, and frost was forming on her camera lens. "This is remarkable," she said, examining what was left of Tom Morrison. "The cuts are incredibly precise, almost surgical. And look at this. The edges of the wounds are cauterized." "Cauterized how?" "Extreme cold, instant freezing. Whatever did this could flash freeze living tissue." She looked up at me with new interest. "Have you ever seen frostbite this severe?" I leaned in for a closer look. The edges of Tom's wounds weren't torn or ragged like you'd expect from an animal attack. They looked like they'd been cut with a blade made of ice, then frozen solid before any blood could flow. "Doc, I've seen a lot of cold injuries in my time. This isn't natural frostbite. This is something else." She moved to examine Sarah Morrison, taking more photos and making careful notes. "The arrangement is deliberate," she said. "Look how they're positioned. Hands folded, eyes looking toward the back door. Someone posed them this way. Someone or something. Let's stick to facts for now. The question is, who could have done this? And how did they get in and out of a locked cabin without leaving tracks?" That's when we heard the helicopter. The sound came from outside, growing louder as it approached. But we'd only brought one helicopter, and it was sitting behind my cabin 20 miles away. Dr. Grimwald and I looked at each other. "Expecting company?" she asked. I shook my head and moved to the window. Through the ice crystals on the glass, I could see something dark approaching from the north. But as it got closer, I realized it wasn't a helicopter at all. It was a shape moving through the air, long and thin like a stretched-out person, flying without wings, drifting over the treetops like smoke. And it was coming straight for the cabin. "Doc, we need to leave, right now." "What? Why? I'm not finished here." "Look out the window, and tell me what you see." She pressed her face to the glass, then stepped back with a puzzled expression. "I don't see anything, just trees and snow, but I could see it clear as day." The thing was maybe 100 yards out now, close enough to make out details. 9 feet tall and thin as a rail, with ice-blue skin stretched tight over bones. Its face was mostly skull with black holes where the eyes should be. "We're leaving," I said, grabbing her by the arm. "Wait, I need to finish documenting the scene." "The scene can wait. Whatever killed this family is coming back." We gathered her equipment and ran for the Tucker. I fired up the engine and backed away from the cabin as fast as the snow would allow. In the rearview mirror, I watched the flying thing descend toward the Morrison place. "I don't understand," Dr. Grimwald said. "What did you see back there?" "Something that shouldn't exist, something that's been hunting in these mountains for God knows how long." The Tucker hit a patch of ice and slid sideways. I corrected the steering and kept driving, but our tracks were easy to follow in the fresh snow. Whatever that thing was, it would have no trouble finding us. We were maybe 5 miles from the cabin when the storm hit again. Not gradual this time. The wind went from calm to howling in the space of a heartbeat. Snow came down so thick, I couldn't see the hood of my own vehicle. "This is impossible," Dr. Grimwald said, checking her weather instruments. "Storms don't develop this fast." I had to shout over the wind. "This isn't a natural storm." The temperature was dropping fast. Ice started forming on the inside of the windshield, even though our heater was running full blast. My steering wheel was so cold it burned my hands through my gloves. That's when I saw the thing in the snow ahead of us. It stood in the middle of the trail, tall and impossibly thin, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its mouth was open, in what might have been a grin, showing teeth like broken icicles. I yanked the steering wheel hard to the left, trying to go around it. The Tucker lurched sideways and started to slide. We hit a snowbank and stopped dead, the engine coughing and dying. "What happened?" Dr. Grimwald asked. "Why did you swerve?" I looked through the windshield. The trail ahead was empty except for swirling snow. "You didn't see it?" "See what?" I tried to restart the engine. It turned over once, twice, then nothing. The cold was getting to everything now. The battery, the fuel lines, the oil in the engine block. We were stranded. "We need to walk back to my cabin," I said. "It's not far. In this storm, we'll freeze to death before we go a mile." She was right, but staying in the Tucker wasn't an option either. The temperature inside was dropping by the minute. Pretty soon, we'd be ice sculptures ourselves. I grabbed my emergency gear, blankets, flares, a thermos of hot coffee. "Stay close to me and don't let go of my coat. If we get separated in this wind, we'll never find each other." We climbed out into the blizzard. The wind hit us like a physical blow, driving snow into our faces hard enough to sting. The cold was so intense I could feel it trying to freeze the moisture in my lungs. We started walking, heads down, following my GPS toward the cabin. But something was wrong with the readings. According to the device, we were walking in circles, even though I could feel us moving in a straight line. "The cold is affecting the electronics, Doctor." Grimwald shouted over the wind. Maybe. Or maybe something was messing with our instruments. Something that didn't want us to find our way home. We walked for what felt like hours, but could have been minutes. Time gets strange when you're fighting for your life in weather cold enough to kill. Then Dr. Grimwald stumbled and fell. "I can't feel my feet," she said. "I need to rest." No stopping. We stop, we die. But when I tried to help her up, I saw that her lips were already turning blue. Hypothermia was setting in faster than should have been possible. That's when I heard the singing again. The same woman's voice from the night before, drifting through the storm. But now I could make out some of the words. Russian, definitely, but Old Russian. Something about winter and hunger and feeding time. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the mountains. And it was getting closer. "Do you hear that?" I asked Dr. Grimwald. She shook her head, eyes glazed and confused. "Hear what?" I pulled out one of my emergency flares and lit it. Red light blazed through the storm, casting weird shadows in the snow. For just a moment, I could see shapes moving in the blizzard around us. Tall and thin, keeping their distance, but watching, waiting. That's when Dr. Grimwald screamed. I spun around and saw her being dragged backwards into the storm by something I could barely make out, a dark shape with 2 long arms, moving faster than anything human could move. I fired my pistol at it, but the bullets passed right through like it was made of smoke. Dr. Grimwald's screams got fainter and fainter until the wind swallowed them completely. Then I was alone in the storm with nothing but a dying flare and the knowledge that something was hunting me, something that had taken the best medical examiner in Alaska like she was a child's toy. I started running toward where I thought my cabin should be, but the snow was too deep and the wind too strong. Every step was a battle, and I was losing ground fast. Behind me, I could hear something big moving through the forest. Following my tracks, getting closer with every step, I made it back to my cabin more by luck than skill. The storm had me turned around so bad I was ready to lie down and let the cold take me when I saw the yellow glow of my windows through the snow. I stumbled through the front door and slammed it behind me, throwing every lock and deadbolt I had. Not that it would matter if the thing chasing me could pass through walls like smoke, but it made me feel better. My cabin was colder than the inside of a freezer. The fire in my wood stove had gone out, and ice crystals were forming on every surface. Whatever force was behind this storm, it was draining the heat out of everything. I tried to restart the fire, but my matches were so cold they crumbled in my fingers. The wood was frozen solid, covered in a layer of frost that shouldn't exist indoors. Even my emergency heating tablets wouldn't light. That's when I heard the scratching on the roof. Long, slow scrapes, like claws on metal. The sound moved from one end of the cabin to the other, then back again. Something big was up there, testing the strength of the tin roofing. I grabbed my rifle and pointed it at the ceiling, following the sound. But I knew bullets wouldn't help. I'd already tried shooting the thing in the storm, and they'd passed right through like it was made of air. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet except for the wind outside. Then I heard Dr. Grimwald's voice calling from the forest. "Ice, help me, I'm hurt. I can't find the cabin." My hand was already on the door handle before my brain caught up. That wasn't Dr. Grimwald. I'd seen her dragged away into the storm. Whatever was calling to me was using her voice to trick me into going outside. "Ice, please, I'm freezing out here." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every tone exactly right. If I hadn't seen her taken with my own eyes, I would have believed it completely. Then I heard my own voice calling from outside. Doc, where are you? I've got the cabin. Follow my voice." Hearing yourself calling from outside your own home is enough to break your mind. I backed away from the door, rifle ready, and tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. The temperature in the cabin kept dropping. My breath was coming out in thick white clouds, and frost was forming on the barrel of my gun. Whatever heat my body was producing, the cold was sucking it away faster than I could replace it. That's when the windows started to crack. Not from impact, but from the cold. Long spiderweb fractures spread across the glass as the temperature dropped beyond what the material could handle. Soon they would shatter completely, letting in the storm and whatever was hiding in it. I needed heat, and I needed it fast. My emergency gear was in the Tucker, 20 miles away. All I had left were 3 thermite flares for avalanche rescue. They burned hot enough to melt through ice, but they only lasted a few minutes each. The front window exploded inward, showering me with glass. Snow and wind poured through the opening, along with something else, a cold so intense it felt like being punched in the chest, the kind of cold that could stop your heart. Through the broken window, I saw it clearly for the first time. 9 feet tall and thin as a skeleton, with skin the color of old ice. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with fingers like icicles. The face was mostly skull, with black eye sockets and a mouth full of broken teeth. But the worst part was that it looked hungry, not just for food, but for warmth, for life itself. Its empty eye sockets were fixed on me, like I was the last flame in a world of ice. "You took my food," it said in a voice like grinding glaciers. "The family was mine. Now you will feed me instead." It reached through the window with those impossibly long arms, fingers stretching toward me like frozen claws. Where they touched the air, ice crystals formed and fell like snow. I lit the first thermite flare. Red fire blazed between us, and the creature jerked back with what might have been surprise. For a moment, the temperature in the cabin stabilized. The ice on the walls started to melt, and I could feel warmth on my face again. The thing in the window hissed like steam escaping from a radiator. Fire will not save you. I am winter itself. I am the hunger that comes when all else dies. But it kept its distance from the flare, and that told me everything I needed to know. It was afraid of heat, really afraid. I backed toward my emergency supply cabinet, keeping the flare between me and the window. The creature watched every move I made, those black eye sockets tracking me like a predator sizing up its prey. "You cannot run," it said. "There is nowhere to go. The storm is mine, the cold is mine, everything that lives in winter belongs to me." My hands found the cabinet handle. Inside were my spare thermite flares and my emergency radio beacon. If I could get a signal out, maybe someone would come looking for me. Maybe. The creature started to climb through the window, moving like liquid ice. Its touch turned everything black with instant frostbite. The window frame, the walls, the floorboards. Wherever it went, life and warmth died. I lit the second flare and threw it at the thing's feet. Red fire exploded across the floor, and the creature screamed like a winter wind through empty bones. It jerked back outside, leaving claw marks in the frozen wood. "I will wait," it said, from somewhere in the storm. "I have patience beyond your understanding. I have fed for 1,000 winters. I can wait for one more meal." The flare on the floor burned down to nothing, taking the warmth with it. Ice started forming again, faster than before. The creature's presence was draining the heat out of everything faster than fire could replace it. I had one flare left, and then I would be at the mercy of something that had no mercy to give. That's when I remembered the fuel oil for my backup generator. 40 gallons of heating oil in a tank behind the cabin. If I could get to it, if I could find a way to ignite it all at once. The creature appeared at the broken window again, moving closer this time. Ice followed in its wake, coating everything with a layer of frozen death. "Come to me," it whispered. "Let me take away your pain. Let me take away your warmth. It will be over quickly." I could feel my own body heat being drawn away like water down a drain. My fingers were going numb, and my thoughts were getting slow and fuzzy. Hypothermia was setting in, and once it took hold, I wouldn't have the strength to fight back. I lit the last flare and ran for the back door. The creature moved to intercept me, flowing across the floor like spilled water. Those long arms reached out to grab me, and I could feel the cold radiating from its touch like heat from a fire in reverse. I ducked under its grasp and threw myself through the back door into the storm. The fuel tank was somewhere in the whirling snow behind the cabin. I had maybe 2 minutes before the flare died and left me defenseless. The creature followed me outside, moving faster now that it was in its element. The storm was its ally, hiding it from view while it hunted. But I knew my own backyard better than any monster, no matter how old or powerful. My hands found the fuel tank, buried under 3 feet of snow. I yanked off the cap and started pouring heating oil everywhere. On the snow, on the cabin walls, on myself. The smell was sharp and chemical in the frozen air. The creature appeared through the storm, reaching for me with those deadly hands. Ice crystals formed in the air between us, and I could feel my life being drawn away by its presence. I touched the dying flare to the oil-soaked snow. Fire exploded across the back of my property like the wrath of God. 40 gallons of fuel oil went up at once, turning night into day and sending a column of flame 50 feet into the air. The creature screamed and fell back, its ice-blue skin actually steaming in the heat. For the first time since this nightmare began, it looked afraid. "Impossible," it hissed. "Winter always wins, cold always returns." "Not tonight," I said, and threw the flare directly at its face. The thermite hit the creature's center mass and burned straight through. For a moment, it stood there with a hole in its chest glowing red like a coal. Then, it crumbled like an ice sculpture hit with a hammer. The storm died with it. The wind stopped howling, the snow stopped falling, and the temperature started to climb back toward normal. In the space of 5 minutes, the worst blizzard in Alaska history became a clear, star-filled night. I stood there in the dying firelight, surrounded by melting snow and the remains of something that should never have existed. My hands were burned from the oil, my face was black with soot, and I was pretty sure I had frostbite on 3 toes. But I was alive. and the ice Wendigo was dead, or so I thought. The rescue helicopters found me 2 days later, half dead from cold and burns but still breathing. They airlifted me to the hospital in Anchorage, where I spent 3 weeks recovering from severe frostbite and fuel burns. The official report blamed everything on the worst winter storm in state history. The Morrison family died of exposure when their heating system failed. Dr. Grimwald was lost in the blizzard during the rescue attempt. Equipment failure and extreme weather conditions explained all the strange details. I never told them about the creature. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself, and I'd lived through it. They offered me a promotion, a transfer to somewhere warmer, a commendation for surviving the worst weather disaster in Park Service history. I turned it all down and put in for early retirement. After 22 years in Alaska, I was done with the cold. I moved to Arizona the following spring. Desert heat, no snow, no ice, no winter to speak of. But even in the blazing summer sun, I kept the heater in my house, turned up high. The cold had gotten into my bones, and I don't think it'll ever really leave. Sometimes, when the air conditioning kicks on and the temperature drops a few degrees, I remember those black eye sockets staring at me through the snow. I remember the way it moved like liquid ice, and the sound it made when the thermite burned through its chest. But mostly, I try not to think about what I learned in those files I found later. See, I did some research after I healed up, looked into the old stories, the native legends, the Russian accounts from the 1800s. Turns out the ice Wendigo wasn't just one creature, it was a species. A type of thing that lives in the deep cold, feeding on warmth and life when the winters get bad enough. The tribes called them the Hungry Ones. They said the creatures slept in the deep ice most of the time, only waking during the worst storms, and they said killing one just made the others angry. I found reports going back 200 years. Trappers found frozen in impossible positions. Whole families discovered dead in their heated cabins, arranged like dinner guests at a feast. Always during the worst winters, always in the most remote places. The thing I killed wasn't the only one. It was just the one that got hungry first. Last week, I got a call from my replacement in Alaska. Young ranger named Mitchell. Eager and confident like I used to be. He wanted advice about some strange tracks he'd found near a remote cabin. Tracks that were too big for any normal animal, with claw marks instead of toes. I told him to stay away from that area. Told him to file a report recommending it be closed to the public. Made up some story about unstable ice conditions and avalanche danger. He laughed and said I was getting paranoid in my old age, said the tracks were probably just from a bear, and he was going to investigate properly. That was 3 days ago. I haven't been able to reach him since. They're saying on the news that Alaska is heading for another record-breaking winter. Temperatures dropping earlier than normal, storms building in the mountains that shouldn't exist until January. Part of me wants to pack up and fly north, try to help Mitchell and anyone else who might run into something they can't understand. But I know better now. I know what's waiting in those frozen valleys, and I know that fire only keeps them back temporarily. The ice Wendigo isn't dead. None of them are really dead. They're just sleeping in the deep ice, waiting for the next storm strong enough to wake them. And this winter, according to the weather reports, is going to be the coldest on record. If you ever find yourself in Alaska during a bad storm, remember what I'm telling you. If you see tracks in the snow that are too big and too deep, get out of there. If the cold starts feeling wrong, colder than it should be, cold that bites at your bones, find heat and find it fast. And if you ever hear singing in a winter storm, beautiful voices calling from the forest in languages you don't understand, don't listen, don't follow. Don't go outside, because some things hunt in the winter that aren't from our world. Things that are always hungry, always cold, always waiting for the next meal to wander into their frozen domain. The Chugach Mountains are still out there, the deep valleys are still frozen, and somewhere in the ice, the hungry ones are stirring. Winter is coming again, and they remember the taste of fire.